Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber. The afternoon session is about to reconvene. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
There's a quorum present, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Do you have any items for the record?
I do, Madam President. Amendment to be printed from Senator Frederickson to LB 856. Communication from the governor concerning an appointment to the Commission of Industrial Relations, 2 appointments to the Natural Resources Commission, a single appointment to the State Racing and Gaming Commission, and an additional appointment to the State Racing and Gaming Commission. That's all I have this time, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. We will proceed to the first item on the afternoon's agenda.
Madam President, when the body left, pending was Legislative Bill 1412, the committee amendments to said legislative bill, and a motion from Senator Michaela Cavanaugh to bracket the bill.
Turning to the queue then, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Madam President. I wondered if Senator Dover would yield to a question. Okay, sorry. I will maybe ask him the next time on the mic. So I was looking at DHHS vacancies, which there are over 1,000, and I had asked DHHS for this list a while ago because it was my understanding that in order to cut costs, they were going to start by cutting vacancies or not filling vacancies. And by my back of the envelope map, that would be a savings if we cut all of the vacancies, unfilled vacancies, $48 million. Now, obviously, not obviously, I guess, hopefully, they're not intending to cut all of the vacancies. But I bring this up, colleagues, because I am concerned about what vacancies we are eliminating, because why weren't they filled? And over 1,000 vacancies is a concerning number to me that go unfilled. And a lot of these positions have been put into statute. So I'm hoping in the future to dig in on this a little bit more and figure out what exactly is being eliminated and why are they being eliminated. I know also that there are positions that were that are non-union that are being eliminated, that are not vacancies, but they're actually eliminating the positions because I believe that there was a goal of eliminating over, 13% or something like that was the number I heard a few weeks back. And so I thought it was important, since we're talking about the budget and we seem to be finding savings places, and I feel like we didn't ask enough questions about why we have these savings. And that kind of brings me back to the question around the Department of Transportation. Did we ask if that $181 million was already allocated? Do they need the $20 million? Should we, colleagues, be giving $20 million in ARPA funds to the Department of Transportation if we don't know if they're already using the $181 million that they have? If that money is not all allocated and spoken for, then perhaps we should let them use that money first so that we don't have to transfer that burden to our general funds, and so that we can fund some of these other important things like behavioral health and developmental disabilities and housing, the luxury items, maybe throw in food too, just for good measure. So that's one thing that I'd like to get to the bottom of, and I do intend to. I haven't followed up with HHS because I got this not that long ago, but One of the things that is of concern to me is the number of open positions at the Lincoln Regional Center. It appears that there are dozens of registered nurse positions and mental health security specialists, again, dozens, if not maybe 50, and then licensed practical nurse, again, about 30. And Senator Blood has raised the alarm on the Lincoln Regional Center numerous times. They are in crisis there. The employees there are in crisis.
1 minute.
And we seem to have almost 150 vacancies. The Lincoln Regional Center isn't that big. I mean, it's a facility. I've been to it. But the fact that we have 150 vacancies means that they are severely understaffed. And that should concern everyone. And that also means that we're paying overtime. So in order to cover the shifts that we aren't filling, we're paying more for those shifts than we would be if we filled these positions. So we need to consider the offsets of when we're cutting positions, if it's going to require more overtime from the current workforce, because that's not going to save us money in the long run. And that's just going to put us in a worse position at the end of the day. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh. Senator Raybold would like to recognize 15 Girl Scouts from Lincoln located in the North Balcony. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Vargas, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, President. Sorry, I got something in my throat. Again, I rise in support of LB 1412, opposed to the bracket motion, although I agree with many of the points that my colleague, Senator Cavanaugh, and others are raising on different things, especially on the staffing. You know, one of the things that we discussed in committee were two things. One, open FTE positions. Many of us have spoken in committee about increasing wages. We ourselves can't increase wages, but what we can do is make sure that the agency is hearing from us that we don't agree that staffing vacancies as a result of just the job itself. Staffing vacancies is also as a result of not making sure that we're competitive. And there is a competition for nurses. There's a competition for behavioral health individuals. So we're funding the FTEs because we want to make sure they have the resources for those FTEs. But if they're not paying better, similar to the same rationale in this adjustment that we're using for state patrol, or what we used for corrections in the past years, or with our public employees through NAPE, through staffing, we're not going to be able to retain the people we need in these really important positions. And so we continue to fund the FTEs, did not have, obviously, the legislative ability to do anything with salary, but we do want to make sure they have the funds to be able to make the decision to increase salary. The other thing that I wanted to make sure to respond to was just the conversation they were having recently about, you know, some of the other aspects of the budget. As a reminder, again, not a lot of general fund obligations in this budget adjustment. A large overwhelming majority, I would say 80%, in terms of the net impact, is as a result of TIOSA funding that we have a statutory obligation to fund. And the other things are one-time transfers, either for capital construction that you might have seen, capital construction for State Patrol, Crime Lab, and others. And so, look, if it was just me drafting the bill, it would look very different. But we have a committee. We're working through the process. We're working to find compromise where we possibly can. And we also want to make sure that we have to have a balanced budget, but also more importantly, that there is, we're thinking ahead into the future, making sure we can have balanced budgets heading into future years, given the revenue predictions. But there are really important things in here. There's funding that we're providing for home visit nursing programming that is evidence-based. There is some money for housing. It's a net in terms of not more money for housing, but instead transfers from other housing programs. I will say this very clearly. We are not doing enough for housing. I agree with my colleagues talking about that, not only Senator Wishart and Senator McKinney and Senator Kavanaugh and others, but we are not doing enough in this arena. We're spending about half the amount of resources for any type of housing credits, tax credits, direct appropriations than Iowa. We have a lot fewer housing stock. So the fact that we do have some funds going to workforce programs is a good thing. I agree with the inequities. I don't think it's equitable. I don't think 50-50 is always perfect, but equitable means figuring out where the greatest needs are, also where we're seeing the largest gaps in housing stock shortage, which is the reason why I support both programs. I support both the rural and the middle income workforce urban housing program, both of which are cut from the same cloth in terms of when they were both created and how they started up. But I also want to make sure that we are getting the dollars out that we currently have, and we are watchful on utilization rates for pretty much every program. Part of the reason we're in the scenario we are and have the last couple of years
1 minute.
is not getting dollars out within programs, which means that there are times where we ask agencies, do you have a plan for spending down the remainder of the programs? Sometimes they have a plan, which is when we leave them harmless. Sometimes they don't. And because some of these aid programs are utilization only, that's when we're trying to find good ways to balance the budget and some cost saving mechanisms. It's not something that I want to do necessarily. What I think we should focus more of our efforts on, especially in other policies and other programs and in other committees, is getting the dollars out that we currently do have in programs. It's the efforts that Senator Kavanaugh has been doing and others in HHS with TANF. We need to get dollars out in these programs that are sitting there idly. I have an amendment on select file and making sure that we're getting more of the dollars out that have been dedicated for years for DD provider rates, rather than holding some of them and just not getting all the dollars out what they were originally.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. Senator Walls, you're recognized. Senator Conrad, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. Good afternoon, colleagues. I thought I had a few more moments, but I will jump forward as Senator Walls must be otherwise occupied. And I was wondering if perhaps there's a member of the Appropriations Committee that could help to shine some additional light. Oh, Senator Dorn, unfortunately, just caught my eyesight here, but if Senator Dorn would yield to some questions, please. Oh, there's Senator Clemens back in, but he's off the hook for the minute.
Oh.
Senator Dorn, will you yield?
Oh, yes, I would,
Right.
yes.
All right. Thanks, Senator Dorn. Thanks for being a good sport to help me out. But some of the points I think of greatest contention thus far have really centered around the sweeps in the budgetary package on the behavioral health dollars and the developmental disabilities funding. I know that these are issues that you've worked really, really hard on during your time in the legislature. And if you would be willing to maybe help those outside of the committee or on the floor or at home have a better understanding of, were those contentious discussions at the committee level? Was it a no-brainer because it felt like there was plenty of money there? Can you help us just get a sense about, you know, the level of comfort or discomfort that, and I'm not asking you to say how you voted on things individually. I know how the appropriations process works with the cloak of secrecy and the death pact and all of those things that come together, but just help the body perhaps understand what the committee was thinking about and looking at, and what really the discussions were like on behavioral health and developmental disabilities, because I know those are issues that cut across all our districts, all across the political spectrum, that we all care about and want to do the right thing on.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. There was a lot of discussion about that. There were several bills brought by other senators and myself also about this. Behavioral health, developmental disabilities, some of those we did pull basically some funds back as you looked at the end of the fiscal year and the dollar amounts they had there. There was discussion on why when the director was in, when Tony Green was in with DHHS, asked some specifically pointed questions about why there were funds left in there. You know, basically over the years, we appropriated the funds and now some of them aren't getting spent or aren't getting used. I guess you hear the concept from them that they believe that all of the funding that should go out is going out, that it comes from, I call it the providers, that they're not turning in some bills, they're not doing certain things. And yet when you visit with the providers on the other side, developmentally disabled, and those providers, they're telling us that with the department now, they are turning in claims, they're turning in things, and they are not being, I call it adequately filled, adequately funded, and that there are challenges sometimes that they tell them that these aren't the right programs, you can't put it in that way, and all of those things. So I know when Tony Green was there, I don't remember how long he was there, probably 15 minutes at least, there were a lot of these questions asked. Okay. What is going on and why? I will mention this also. Part of what we had COVID, we had ARPA funds. Yes. Part of what it looks like, a little bit of it is that some of these provider rates had been funded, or other ARPA funds that they got in had been used to fill in some of that, so they didn't need to use as much of their, I call it their appropriations. Okay. Well, now we're through all of that, and now we're having to use those appropriations, but the dollars or the paperwork shows that, oh, they're not quite up to that full level. And yet we hear from all of the providers, all of them, that they need all of that funding.
Yeah, no, that's perfect, Senator Dorn. Thank you so much for walking us through it, because that I kind of expected it probably went like that on at the committee level, but it's good to hear that on the floor. And I think it just kind of shows the point that these issues were hotly contested at the committee level. I think there's still a lot of energy around continuing discussion as part of our budget now as it becomes the full body's budget on the floor. That kind of information is helpful to negotiations moving forward, because I don't think there's a single senator in this body who wants to short our behavioral health and DD needs, but we got to make sure that we figure it out and get it right for Nebraska. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Duncan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President, and good afternoon, colleagues. I've not had much of a chance to continue my thoughts earlier today that I was starting with regards to what isn't contained in the budget. So I wanted to take a few chances to talk a little bit more about that, to continue to raise awareness about kind of what we're talking about with regard to these court interpreters. So when I last left off in the conversation that I was having with everybody here, we did not increase their pay by the end of last legislative session. What that ultimately led to, as I said, was a work stoppage where a vast number of our interpreters were no longer going into court, no longer able to fulfill the duties that are constitutionally required, simply because they weren't able to make ends meet. During the interim, I had a number of meetings with court interpreters, the individuals representing the Supreme Court as an agency, and myself, trying to figure out what the best path forward was. And I want to laud the Supreme Court for essentially doing their absolute best to try to make ends meet with what they were given at the end of last year, but it simply just wasn't feasible for them to give the court interpreters the pay raise that would keep them in line with the cost of inflation or the cost of living increases since their last pay increase in 2004. What was ultimately agreed upon, colleagues, was a temporary pay raise to $75 an hour for certified court interpreters, and I believe $50 an hour for registered court interpreters. So what that means is there was a very small increase, helpful obviously for those small business owners and interpreters who were working like that, but it was not the $85 they were asking for to keep them in line with cost of living increases. At that meeting and at other meetings, it was said that if we are not able to get further appropriations to this purpose, for this purpose to the Supreme Court, that pay increase very likely would not be sustainable. And what that ultimately means is that pay increase would reduce, or the pay would reduce back down to what it was previously due to the unsustainability of that current number they're at. So what we have, colleagues, right now is a Band-Aid on the problem, and we as a body have to fix it. in the broad scheme of what we're talking about here, we're asking for $600,000. That was the request this year with my bill, $600,000 in order to do a one-time injection, essentially, to cover those costs, to float us until we ultimately find ourselves having the same conversation again next year, because we didn't want to bring it up last year or address it last year. So this is always going to be a problem. And I know I sound like a broken record, and I'm guessing a number of my colleagues are, frustrated that we keep talking about this, but it's a problem we have to fix, because if we don't fix it, there will be problems that we have already seen. What I know is if that cost goes back down, the court interpreters are not going to be able to work, and we're going to lose them to other industries that pay much, much better wages, like the medical industry or private corporations who can actually pay their living wages they're asking for, and we're not going to have them in court. And that's going to result in cases being continued, and that's going to result in people remaining in custody longer, and ultimately it's going to result in taxpayer dollars being spent simply because our court interpreters don't have sufficient funds to continue working in this job. Now, I've heard it said, and we're going to probably talk more about this, and I'll punch my light again if I get a chance to here later on. I've heard it said that the Supreme Court already has the money to pay for them, that they already have this money sitting in a cash fund. That is not correct. There is, in fact, a cash fund that the Supreme Court has. If the budget, as approved, goes through, a large chunk of that money is going to be taken out of that cash fund, leaving them with an amount in that cash fund that helps them pay for certain costs, but there's not enough for a sustainable and ongoing pay increase moving forward. In addition to that, the amount of money that's going to be left in that cash fund, while not technically obligated, is used consistently, time and time again, for things that we have told them, thank you, Madam President, that we have told them they have to do, the courts, such as court improvement projects, such as paying for actual facilities that work in greater Nebraska. And that alone is going to essentially deplete that cash fund to the point in which they've already said they're going to have to come back to us next year and ask for an increase in their budget just to pay for the things they're already working on. So the idea that there's just this unused pot of money that is being hoarded, to the best of my knowledge, is incorrect. And I have worked long and hard on this and had many conversations with folks from the Supreme Court and their budget division. And my understanding is that while they are able to temporarily increase the pay for these court interpreters, it is very likely that if we don't act, we're going to see that money go back down, and we're going to see court interpreters leave their jobs. So, colleagues, I will continue to talk maybe a little bit more about the details of that fund and kind of where we came from, but I want to make sure we do something about this soon. I think we have to act. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Duncan. Senator McKinney, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll yield the balance of my time to Senator Michaela Cavanaugh.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're yielded 4 minutes, 52 seconds.
Thank you, Madam President. Would Senator Dover yield to a question?
Senator Dover, will you yield?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Dover. I missed this yesterday, but it was brought to my attention that when you spoke yesterday, you talked about meeting with a consultant.
Yes.
And that was a consultant for the committee?
No, just someone hired by the governor that's working on looking at efficiencies. Hopefully, the idea is either to be able to take care of more people with the same amount of money, or perhaps save money that could perhaps be reappropriated, reallocated to do other things that the body would like done.
Did they share where they were going to find these efficiencies?
No, they're going to look at everything. And along as we're talking, I just talked to Senator Conrad earlier, and I would like to see her come to the Legislative Council. I think that'd be a wonderful way to kick off where we all get together. My first one was Perkins Canal. And so I think that'd be a really good way to have the new senators come in, the existing senators come in, she can give an update kind of where she is and what she's trying to do. But basically, she's just trying to find inefficiencies. The idea is
what was the purpose of the meeting with the Appropriations Committee then?
She didn't meet with the Appropriations Committee. I heard she had met with some other people. And I said, well, can I meet with her and just be introduced to her? So I was introduced to her, and just I said what she was doing. We weren't given any numbers or anything. She kind of just gave us some kind of a broad understanding.
Did she share any of the cuts to DHHS with you?
There were no numbers discussed.
Okay. You mentioned in your remarks yesterday that her contract was based on performance, but I reviewed the contract and I don't believe that to be true.
My understanding as I talked to fiscal office was that She was to find 3% her first and 6% her second, and I was understanding she wouldn't get paid unless she found those. I mean, maybe I misunderstood the conversation that we had, but my understanding was that she wouldn't get paid that money because we're obviously responsible for money, and Senator Armendariz and I have talked, and we only looked at 2.5, and then it was 4 years. I thought that's a lot of money, and I wanted to just find out.
And how many people are working with her?
I don't know. I don't know. I had a very casual conversation with her. I don't know. I mean, she has staff people, obviously, but I wish I could say more. I really just kind of was introduced to her, met her, kind of said what she's looking for efficiencies, and used an example of kind of critical path management where.
Because she's had contracts in other states that weren't even $1 million.
Yeah, I really can't.
So I'm curious how we got to such a large amount with her.
My understanding was, I think the numbers I quoted was and I guess it could be wrong. My understanding was basically she gets about 1% of what she finds. So if she got 2.5, that's 5, and then she'd find somewhere just shy of.
The contract is for $10 million. There's no stipulations in it for percentages, but.
Okay.
I've looked at it.
Okay.
I mean, not an attorney, but I can read.
Right. No, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for
So
clarifying that.
there's no stipulation for percentages, and this is the contract that was entered into with no bid as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no stipulation for performance. It's $10 million over 4 years, 2.5 million a year,
Yeah.
and it's still a mystery to me as to why we entered into a no bid contract with somebody like this, because the legislature put this forward and there was a very short time frame.
Right.
But as you're probably well aware, when we have a short time frame and we realize that, we always extend the time frame out. And nobody ever asked us to make an amendment to extend the time frame for the.
I'd love to get a copy of that contract. If I
Oh,
could.
sure. Yeah.
1 minute.
I have one on the floor. I'll have a page get one to you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for the conversation. And thank you to Senator McKinney for the time. I appreciate it. I have more cash fund questions coming, just to telepath that. One of them is the Civic and Community Center Financing Fund, the State Visitors Promotion Fund, the Water Recreation Enhancement Fund, and I already did the Department of Motor Vehicles Fund, but I'll come back to the funds next time around. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney, Dover, and Kavanaugh, Michaela Kavanaugh. Senator Merman has some guests in the north balcony, 30 fourth grade students, 2 teachers, and 5 sponsors from Sutton Public Schools in Sutton, Nebraska. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator John Lowe would like to announce some visitors as well. Olena Rudenko and Ola Rudenko from Kearney, Nebraska, Mileno Rudenko from Kearney and Ukraine, all of them, and Sandy Cook Fong from Kearney, Nebraska. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Hunt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to yield my time to Senator Conrad.
Senator Conrad, you're yielded 4 minutes, 53 seconds.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Senator Hunt, for the time. I really appreciated Senator Dorn illuminating a little bit, providing a little bit more illumination in regards to the discussions that happened at committee level on behavioral health and developmental disabilities. And I am confident that the body will seek to remedy some of those issues and concerns that started at the committee level and have been a big part of our debate on the budget thus far. I can tell you that I think some of the proudest moments in the legislature are when we come together, particularly to make sure that Nebraskans with developmental disabilities and their families and the providers who serve them have the resources they need to live with dignity. And I want to thank all the advocates who came out yesterday to reaffirm that really proud history that we have as a state on those issues. So I anticipate that that will be a huge part of negotiation and discussion from general file to select file, as will the sweeps to the behavioral health funds that are desperately needed by Nebraskans in need and providers across the state. So even if we fail to address that with specific budgetary amendment today, please know, don't lose hope. Those conversations are continuing. They're very productive, and I anticipate that there will be something substantive in regards to those two significant concerns as part of the ongoing budget deliberations. The other issues which we've heard a lot about from our constituents and other stakeholders include ensuring that we have appropriate water sources, both on tribal lands for our Nebraska neighbors and indigenous communities that are presently and who have for far too long gone without access to clean water, that we definitely need to be thoughtful about and take up in regards to the water need for the residents at the York Women's Prison as well. I think it's well established. We're all well aware of the ongoing health issues that exist in regards to water matters at the York Women's Prison that we need to address immediately, sooner rather than later, and can't kick the can down the road on any longer. Critical access to justice issues with interpreters and rural practice and attorneys who are working in the landlord-tenant programs. I think those, just flagging those as key issues for ongoing debate. And then we really need to make sure that we're doing right by our first responders as well. And I'm grateful for all of the members who approached me after my comments in that regard earlier to make sure that we can elevate the needs of the State Patrol in these discussions as we move forward. Finally, there's a couple of other issues that I want to make sure to lift up. And we've heard a lot about special projects and earmarks that are baked into this budget. And I don't know if Senator Clements is on the floor or not, but I would pose an open question to any members of the Appropriations Committee. And it's not any sort of editorial comment on the efficacy or benevolence of the different entities that we're looking at. Thank you, Madam President. Whether that's Cedars, whether that's Madonna, these are great organizations that do incredible work. But my question is, when we single them out in the budget in this way, does that lift any sort of special legislation concerns with those specific earmarks in terms of how they are drafted? And what kind of slippery slope does that start for other earmarks into the future? So I just want to lift both the legal question and the policy question in regards to some of those issues that my friend Senator Hansen rightly brought up about the HVAC system. And I know there's been a lot of dialogue about the Cedars program as well. Thank you, Mr. President, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
I get to close, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Madam President. So again, I want to thank Senator McKinney for the time and Senator Dover for the conversation. I did get Senator Dover a copy of the contract. It's on the DAS website, I believe. It's an emergency contract with an efficiency expert that was entered into last year. So that's for those that were watching and didn't know what we were talking about. That's what we were talking about. So cash funds. So I was looking at the Civic and Community Center Financing Cash Fund, and it's for grants as described, assistance as described. And I just kind of wondered why we were taking $4 million out of that. And I was reading in the report. Now I lost it because I closed my page. Why? I don't know. Apologize. Cash funds. Okay, yeah, here we go. On page 20, we've got the Civic and Community Engagement Community Center Fund. So the committee recommendation includes transfer of $4 million from the Civic and Community Center Financing Fund in FY 24-25 to the general fund. CCCFF receives 30% of revenue certified under the Convention Center Facility Financing Act, a sales tax turnback used for financing convention centers. The CCCFF is used to award grants for the construction of new civic and recreation centers, renovation of existing centers, preservation of historic buildings, districts, et cetera. Projected fund balance at the end of FY 24-25 will be approximately $1.6 million. Would Senator Clements yield to a question?
Senator Clements, will you yield?
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that you were at the ready. It's almost like you knew. Okay, so this fund, it's interesting. It's a tax turnback fund. So are we again underutilizing this for our civic and community centers? Is there not a need? Because it seems like it could cover a lot of community improvement projects.
Well, let's see. That's on
Page 20.
62 in the gold book.
Oh, 62 in the
Page
gold.
19. Is it 19 in the green book?
It's on page 20. But yeah, the chart is on page
Oh,
19.
the
Sorry.
description. Yes.
Sorry, I feel like I'm yelling. Oftentimes I'm told that I talk too quietly on the microphone. Today I feel like I'm talking loudly. Anyways,
Civic and Community Center Fund. Yeah, that is turnback tax, and the analysis in the gold book shows they've been spending $3 million, $2.5 million, projecting $3.5 million of spending with $4.6 million of revenues. This transfer would leave them $950,000. So the fund has been growing for the last 5 years, and this would be still leaving them funds and revenue coming in.
so the fund has been growing. They haven't been utilizing it. So again, I guess this brings up the question of, are we charging too high of a tax for this?
Well, there haven't been as many applicants to use it. They have to have applicants, I believe.
Do they advertise
1 minute.
This fund?
They didn't say, I don't know.
Okay. I don't see it on page 62. I apologize. Under what
I believe
category?
it's the middle one, 72, Economic Development, Civic and Community Center Financing,
The governor's executive
page
budget?
62.
I'll have to come see you. I think I'm almost out of time.
Maybe there are some additions of that that had different page numbers, but
Okay.
it's Agency 72.
Agency 72, thank you. Okay, thank you. I might ask you more questions in the future. Thank you, Senator Clements.
Thank you, Senator Clements and Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Senator Jacobson would like to recognize 23 12th grade students from North Platte St. Patrick's High School in North Platte, Nebraska. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Lippincott, you're recognized.
Thank you. I'd like to ask any of you that are referencing your Irish Spring Green Book on page 4, about 3/4 the way down under bills incorporated into committee proposal, Senator Bostar has LB 1289 appropriates funds to the military to grant to municipal airport, and that's requesting $3 million. If you turn then to page number 8, I'd kind of like to walk through that just very briefly. Up at the top of page 8 in the Green Book, it says transfers to and from general fund. Unlike automatic transfers that occur after the close of the fiscal year and are statutorily required, other transfers can take place as specifically enacted by the legislature. Dropping down then to the third paragraph, it reads, the Appropriations Committee recommendation includes an additional transfer of $3 million in fiscal year 24-25 to fund the provisions of LB 1289, Senator Bosar's bill. The funds will be used by the military department to award a grant to the municipal airport located in a city of primary class, like Lincoln. The grant shall only be used by the municipal airport for the maintenance, repair, construction of runway facilities that serve the purposes of providing A, national and state military preparedness, B, defense mission support, and C, civilian passenger or cargo air services. I'd like to expand just very briefly on that regarding the history of the Lincoln Airport. It was constructed back in 1950, about 75 years ago. In 1991, it did have a partial resurfacing. That's about 33 years ago. And then just 10 years ago, it had some patchwork done in 2014, and that was $6 million. And they got 90% of that funding from the FAA. What the request right now and the need is for the runway to be completely redone, it would require $96 million would be the total fund. And currently they have $84 million has been designated from the Air Force and also the FAA. And we're requesting, Senator Bosar's requesting $3 million, which I believe that we need to ensure that they receive. And then there's about $9 million left over, which hopefully the city of Lincoln can kick in. Just as a comparison, during my time at Delta Airlines, flew out of Atlanta, Georgia during 30 years, and they would religiously completely redo the runways approximately every 20 years, and they've got 5 runways down there. And of course, we just start talking about one runway here in Lincoln, but of course, the elements of the climate here is much different than Atlanta. We have the cold that Georgia does not have, and of course, that causes concrete to expand and contract with the change of the weather. So bottom line is that we certainly do need to have that runway refinished. As I read here just a few moments ago, also the military will be kicking in with this because the Lincoln Airport does serve as a standby runway in case the Offutt Air Force Base would ever go down. So it does have national importance. $3 million that I believe is very important from Senator Bosar's request to resurface and redo the runway here at the Lincoln Airport. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lippincott. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Oh, thank you, Madam President. I appreciate Senator Lippincott walking us through the explanation and justification for the $3 million under, I believe it's LB 1289 as integrated into the budget. And it is good to hear both the rationale and the other kind of skin in the game from the city of Lincoln, the military, the federal government, and others. I would point out that we're having a rehab or refurbishment of the Omaha airport as well, with a lot of federal funds being injected into that, thanks to the current federal administration. So that's nice. So I do appreciate folks explaining and walking us through, because like I've said before, those of us who don't sit on the committee haven't had the opportunity to really hear the justification for each of these particular items that ended up in the budget, and some of the stuff that didn't quite make it in. We've got some suggestions. Senator Brewer, I think, has an amendment to put in funding that was left out for the Special Olympics, and Senator Dungan has an amendment to put in funding for court interpreters. And I think Senator Dungan did a nice job of explaining the last time he was on the microphone about what is the justification or necessity really for that expenditure, as well as the explanation for why the funding that is in the court's cash reserves is not really an option at this point in time. And that's something, we've had a lot of conversations. We've heard a lot about these funds, saying, well, there's money out there that can be used. And, we've heard from folks that they said, well, the administration said that they didn't need this money or they didn't want this money. But we have people who are still telling us that they need this money for whatever purpose. And of course, the courts, I think, have continued to say that they don't have the money to pay for the raises for court interpreters going forward. And the court interpreters have said that they're not going to continue providing that service without a raise, which is why it's so important, because I don't think we all want to find out what happens when we don't have any court interpreters. I, again, can tell you from my personal experience that courtrooms that require an interpreter that don't have one can't do what they need to do. And that hearing then gets continued. And it's actually it's really difficult to explain to the parties when the next hearing is and why the hearing isn't happening without an interpreter at that point. So just even having that minimal conversation about what exactly is happening is difficult without appropriate interpreters. So that's a really important justification. I guess I was remiss by not commenting at the start that I support the bracket. And the AM 2566, I guess I don't know where I'm at on it yet, but I have heard a lot of good explanations from folks on the Appropriations Committee that I appreciate, and it is helpful. But I also wanted to say, I find it hard to believe that someone has complained about the other Senator Kavanaugh being too quiet. It's a complaint I often get, that I speak too quiet, too softly, maybe is what people think. I just feel like when I speak a little bit softer, sometimes people try a little harder to listen. And when people actively listen, they maybe actually hear a little more. Sometimes if it's just sort of the loud sound coming out at you, there's a physiological response that makes people maybe not quite listen as intently. So that's why I speak softly sometimes.
1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. Very appropriately volumed. Like I said, I appreciate the conversation. I have been looking at the bills that are mentioned in here to kind of go back to Senator Wayne's original comments. There are a number of bills that are in the budget that have zero money being spent, and I am curious about that being a budget item. Setting policy without spending money seems to be the purview of everyone but the Appropriations Committee, but spending money seems to be the purview of the Appropriations Committee. So my question is, specifically the ones that have $0, why are those part of the budget, and what's the justification for that? And I would ask anybody who is listening that's part of the Appropriations Committee to explain some of that to me. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator John Kavanaugh. Senator Conrad, you're recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Madam President. Good afternoon, colleagues. Just wanted to also lift up a few other issues I had a chance to visit with Senator Dorn about on the mic earlier, and have had a chance to visit with a lot of members engaged in the budget debate and on appropriations. I think that there is definitely a very, very productive negotiation happening in regards to some key issues involving behavioral health and developmental disabilities, tribal water, access to justice issues. And then also, I think that there is considerable, if not unanimous, support for the work that Senator Brewer is leading in regards to providing some state resources for Special Olympics, which I think all of us are very, very excited about. So just to reiterate where we are procedurally, even if those amendments do not come up on the board before we hit cloture today, that shouldn't be a signal to anyone that those issues aren't going to be taken up as part of our ongoing budgetary deliberations and negotiations. Those are key issues that are important to Nebraskans, that are important to many members, and it's just hard to get the right folks together in the middle of this debate with executive sessions and otherwise, and get back some of the technical information we need to select solidify those negotiations from a drafting and a fiscal perspective, in essence, on the fly. So I just wanted to signal to people, don't dismay. This isn't the end of the conversation when cloture hits in about an hour from now. And some of those very, very worthy projects and ideas that are pending as amendments most likely won't come up for debate and vote on general file. But nevertheless, there is really, really good faith discussion and negotiation happening to make sure that those issues stay alive and we can find a way to incorporate some or all pieces of those puzzles into our budgetary picture from general to select file with the appropriate stakeholders and the appropriate technical support. The one other issue that I did want to lift, but Senator Dorn has already been incredibly gracious with his time on the mic, and this is an issue that I think we'll probably put off till next year, unfortunately, but I pledge to continue to work with Senator Dorn and others on this. Senator Dorn has shown great leadership in lifting up the incredible work our university is doing, and in particular with our mesonet system. I've had the chance to learn a lot about that program. As many of you know, my district encompasses both City and East Campus, the flagship campus of our beloved university system, and I have a lot of constituents that, of course, attend the university and our faculty and staff at the university as well. And so some of these incredible, brilliant climate scientists invited me to come over to East Campus and sit down and really get an in-depth briefing on the mesonet system that Senator Dorn has been championing during his time in the legislature. Unfortunately, there was not enough support to include that request in the budget this year. I really wanted to make another run at it because I think it's such a worthwhile, thank you, Madam President, worthwhile program to pursue, but it sounds like Senator Dorn is committed to bringing back that idea back next year and continuing to build support for it. Wanted to put it on people's radar screen because there's just brilliant minds on East Campus who are doing incredible work for emergency management, for economic development, for precision ag. And these are the exact kind of programs and systems that we should be supporting and updating and innovating around. And I'm hopeful that issue will gain a lot more support over the interim period, and I'll be excited to work with Senator Dorn on that. But have no fear, behavioral health, developmental disabilities, Special Olympics, interpreters, tribal water, and some other key issues are definitely all in the mix as we move from general to select file. And really want to thank everybody for their hard work on and off the mic. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Dungan, you're recognized. Senator Dungan? Senator McKinney, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll yield the rest of my time to Senator Michaela Cavanaugh if she wants it.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you yielded 4 minutes, 51 seconds.
Yes, thank you, Senator McKinney. So I wanted to do a little bit more digging into the Civic Community Center. The I'm going to get it wrong, CCOF or something like that. CCCF. So I asked some informed people outside of the chamber about this, and this is funded through civic centers in Omaha, Ralston. Would you like some time? I mean, I've talked a lot. Okay. Omaha, Ralston, I think probably Lincoln as well, from the like event centers that those places have. And 30% of the tax collected goes into this fund. So the sales tax collected at these CHI in Omaha goes into this fund to fund projects in rural communities, in small towns across the state. And Senator Mike Flood and Senator Megan Hunt both worked very hard to create these creative districts. And this would be a place that those funds could be utilized. So it does matter that we're taking $4 million from this, because the intention of this fund is to take sales tax from the larger communities and infuse it into the smaller communities so that they can also be cultural centers. And it's disappointing that people haven't been taking advantage of these opportunities, but they exist. And perhaps your communities aren't taking advantage of them because they didn't know they exist. There is an art farm. It's called the Art Farm, and it's in Senator Lippincott's district, which reminds me that I owe Senator Lippincott a public access video of the Art Farm. I still owe that to you. I didn't forget. I did forget, but shortly. So the Art Farm is in Senator Lippincott's district, and it's this farm, and it's internationally known, and probably many people in here did not know about it. But this gentleman, he had a family farm, and he took just a portion of it and turned it into an artist in residence facility. And there are artists that come from all over the world. I went and toured it. There was just arriving a woman from China. There was somebody, I think, from Sweden, everywhere. They work on the farm and they do their art on the farm. So it's sort of a exchange. It is so cool. It's in the middle of a farm. It is not easy to find. And it is so cool. And they could use this money. They could use this money to bring in more artists and residents, to infuse some sustainability into this program. And I highly recommend everyone, actually, I will email you all a link to the NETV video about this farm. If you can, go visit it, because it is worth it. Interestingly, there is a ladder into the sky that you can climb. It is terrifying. I climbed probably 1/3 of the way up it and then got like, literally, it's just a ladder, not like a tented ladder, a straight up ladder. Terrifying.
1 minute.
But very cool. So I appreciate, and people are probably like, yeah, okay, these cash funds, you keep talking about these cash funds. These cash funds were created for reasons. And there are so many of them. And taking the funds out of them for a one-time sweep just doesn't sit well with me. Whether they're overfunded because we are charging too much in fees and taxes, or they're overfunded or underutilized. That is something that we need to be examining, not taking the money away. But this particular fund, that $4 million could be transformative in your communities. In your communities, not mine, in yours. I'll come take advantage of it because I like to go visit things like an art farm in Senator Lippincott's district. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Senator Wayne, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to announce to everyone that we have a grand compromise. Carter Lake, Iowa will now become a part of Nebraska. And in exchange, we're going to give DeSoto Bend to Iowa. I figured they have houses and sales tax in Carter Lake. DeSoto, while beautiful, is a net cost to the state, just not a whole lot of revenue being generated. And I want to make sure we solve property tax. So I myself, along with the President of the United States, along with the governor, we sat down just about a half hour ago. And Congress will hopefully pass it here in the next 48 hours, and Carter Lake will be a part of Nebraska. It's a huge deal. I've been working on it for 8 years. We thought it was going to involve National Guard, but we did it peacefully, without any uprisings. Front page news, you heard it here first. Congress will sign it tonight at midnight. President Biden said he will not veto it. The governor was there. It was a great meeting. Just nothing else I can say about it. With that, now turning back to the budget. Why does that relate to the budget? Because we're going to get more tax dollars from Carter Lake, Iowa. We did put a grandfather provision in the agreement where a casino will still stay. So we will have a casino in Nebraska without a horse track. But don't worry, we have speed racing in Carter Lake to make up for it. So we worked that out. We're going to put a little carnival right there, have a Ferris wheel. So when you fly over going into Epley Airfield, people can reach up and touch the plane as it goes by. We worked it out with OSHA. It's possible. You just got to have a safety vest on and no mirrors or shiny objects because you don't want to blind the pilots. So I just wanted to share that great news. I see Senator Mosier is really, really interested in this, but I'll yield the rest of my time to Senator Brandt.
Senator Brandt, you are yielded 2 minutes, 34 seconds.
Would Senator Wayne be available for a question?
Senator Wayne, will you yield?
Yes.
So what kind of maps are you using to do this?
What kind of what?
Maps.
Maps? Oh, we are not using the Gulls, Peter, or Decatur map. We're creating a new map in education. It's part of the package. It's also part of the Grand Compromise. It'll be the Brandt map. It's based off of your drawing that you did your first year of Nebraska. Problem is you drew yourself out of Nebraska, so you might want to fix that. But yeah.
So the Decatur maps are not part of this?
No. After long conversations with the map making people, we felt your map was better, but Decatur comes in real close.
That would be right.
I think it's Mercator actually, but it's okay. We'll figure it out.
All right. Thank you, Senator Wayne.
Do I still have time left, Madam President?
You yielded it.
Good call.
Thank you, Senators Wayne and Brandt. Senator Walls, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I was not really prepared. And I didn't get to talk to Senator Clements beforehand. I was wondering if Senator Clements would help me answer some questions that I have.
Senator Clements, would you yield?
Oh. All right, thank you. Before I start, I do want to say thank you to the Fiscal Office for their hard work and the information that they gave us and continue to give us. And also wanted to say thank you, Senator Clements and Fiscal Office, for the briefing that you had yesterday. As it was suggested, I am trying to follow that little green sheet that we get every day, or that we're supposed to get every day. And after reviewing it, I have some questions and maybe some concerns, and I just wanted to ask you a few questions for some clarification. It is complicated to understand, so I'm hoping that you can answer some questions. I noticed, first of all, on the green sheet that in FY 24-25 and fiscal year 25-26 that our appropriations are more than our receipts.
That is true. That's why the balance on line 25, the difference is going from 574 million to 68 million.
Right. Is that something that should be concerning? Like, it concerns me. I'm just wondering.
It can only last for a short time. We do have the $903 million in cash reserves, but the fiscal year 2027 is the last year that the income tax rates decrease. And so revenues are expected to increase after that with the economy. So that should turn around.
Do we have anything that helps us estimate those out years?
I don't have the governor's budget office last year when they were talking about the income tax bill. did project out farther than just these 2 years. I think they went at least 4 more, or 2 more at least. And I was told that they were, and I saw a chart where it said they were sustainable.
Okay, is there a chance, that, just to make us all feel better, is there a chance, I don't know if fiscal has a chart or somebody has, then,
I'd be glad to request that and get back with you.
okay. The other question I have is, and I apologize, again, it's complicated. I'm just trying to understand it. But you mentioned the ending balance right now is 574 million.
Yes.
Yes. And so that is a snapshot of what we have today.
Yes, if we passed all of the budget proposal from the committee, and the revenues come in as forecasted, that would be our remaining balance, June 30th of 25.
Okay, so if we did nothing else today, if we didn't spend any more of that money in fiscal year 26, 27, it would then drop to 68 million if we did nothing else?
Yes, because there will be new spending. And they're projecting about $388 million of new spending if the budget goes up 2% per year. And then the property tax credit goes up. The community college, we're replacing their property tax. That's
1 minute.
230 million. So those are items that are taking off revenue.
All right, the other question I have is, when you talk about it includes property tax credits, it doesn't include the property tax credit proposals that we are hearing about this year, correct?
No, the revenue committee bill is not on the floor yet. And these are, until that's on the floor, they will not be in the green sheet.
Okay, I'll have some more questions, but thank you so much for those answers. I appreciate that. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senators Walls and Clements. Senator McDonald would like to recognize a guest, Carter Brady, under the south balcony from Lincoln, Nebraska. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Blood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow Senators, friends all, we are learning so much today about the budget. And because of that, I do stand in support of the bracket because we are having such good conversations and bringing lots of issues to light. But I've been talking to our friends over here under the balcony, and I have been looking for weeks. And the one thing that I cannot find in this budget is cybersecurity. I can't find it anywhere in the budget. I can't figure out how much we spend on it. I can't figure out how important it is to the state of Nebraska, but it's a priority everywhere we go. I was able to find out that it falls under the office of our Chief Information Officer, but when you look at their budget, it's not clarified. I don't know if the bids for those contracts, because I'm assuming it's contracted out, since I don't really know. If there were no bid contracts, if there was competition for those contracts. And I want to tell you the reason why this concerns me, not because I think they're trying to hide anything or anything silly like that. It concerns me because what little we talk about technology, unfortunately in our body, there's not a lot of people that understand it. And we've had some bills that tried to get passed this year that showed that clearly, that would have set us up for some cyber attacks. And I wonder where we're at, because I think about the technology just in this room alone. Let's not talk about security, cybersecurity, let's talk about technology. How hard it was to even get these digital boards in this room. Our IT committee, which I was super excited to be on, ended up mostly just being about some little minor technical stuff to make it easier for you guys in here. And to do maybe timesheets on computers for our staff instead of doing paper timesheets. Not real futuristic, common sense, and I don't disapprove, but I think that we have to start taking a more active approach to the budget when it comes to things like cybersecurity. We have one department that seems to be in charge of all of it. I'm not seeing line items that explain to me how it's being spent or where it's being spent. I've spent weeks researching it. I finally just asked if there's some way we can get some copies of the contracts. I think that we have to know where that money is going, how it's being spent. And we have to start taking this seriously, not just for this budget, but for future budgets. And then when we start bringing up things like hiring people to hack back to people who hack into our system, I just want to remind people, when you talk about things like that, you are setting our government up for a full-out attack, a full cyber war. So be thinking about that, because I know there's been some chatter about that in the last week or so. When you make hackers angry by hiring your own hacker because you think tit for tat is a good idea, what they do is they get their other hacker friends and then they end up attacking your whole system. They'll be stealing taxpayer data that we have in our system, HHS data, they'll be stealing your data. So please keep that in mind next year, should these bills come back forward again. But most importantly, let's make sure that our rear ends are covered in the budget and that we're just not tapping into it a little bit because we don't have enough knowledge to know how to do it full force. Thank you, Ms. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Bozen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I am rising to provide a little background on my bill that was included in the budget proposal. It's on page 4, 1209. So this is it was an ask of $2.5 million, and I was grateful that during our conversations with the Appropriations Committee, they were willing to support this through an ARPA fund for services enhancement in Lincoln. So the bill does specify that it's a city of the primary class, and certainly there was questions about Cedars and what that means in terms of are there other options. Cedars is the only emergency licensed shelter in the city of the primary class, but there are other licensed and accredited child caring agencies. But the point of this this bill is to allow them to expand their services. So we all talk about decreasing the number of youth who are placed in detention facilities and how that's not best practices in a lot of cases and the concerns that that creates. If the youth aren't going to the detention center, we have to have options available for these youth, a lot of whom are homeless or who are experiencing a mental health crisis. So this bill will allow for the expansion of those services. It'll allow for a building that does therapy, office space, multi-purpose activity space for community and education activities, recreation space. It will still be able to provide the key card secure entrances to keep the facility safe. This is a one-time ask. They do have ongoing operations funded through their own funding streams. But this will allow us to enhance emergency shelter facilities to ensure access to services for child welfare and juvenile justice involved youth in a residential and community-based setting. So Cedars takes in youth who are both involved with probation through justice-involved programs and also through the Department of Health and Human Services. During this hearing, I had the opportunity, and I was fortunate enough to have several come in and testify in support of this bill, including the Lincoln Chief of Police, Michonne Morrow. A youth came in and testified about the success that he has experienced since essentially graduating from the Cedars program. He was a resident I'll just refer to him by his first name, Q, was a resident from February to August of 2023. He also acknowledged the minimal space available for treatment services. One of the good questions that we had during the hearing came from Senator Lippincott regarding the testimony of Ms. Pamela Mock from I Have a Name and the number of youth that are served there who are the victims of trafficking and find themselves homeless in our community. I had the fortune of having Mr. Goldrich, who is a counselor here in Lincoln, providing services to justice-involved and system-involved youth, and the impact that something like this would have for the community. And I want to be clear, this isn't just youth served that are from Lincoln and Lancaster County. Cedars serves youth from over 40 counties in this area, and actually that number is increasing. In the last 3 years, they have grown 15%, and their street outreach services have grown from just over 1,000 intense client interactions in 2020 to 2021 to over 7,000 intense client interactions in fiscal year 2022 and 2023.
1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. So the goal here is to have the space to serve more kids with more services and better outcomes. It will provide education, group counseling, family interaction, because under their existing facility, I can tell you from my experience having been there, they are out of room and they cannot continue accepting youth to the level that we are asking them to if we cannot support them in their goal of having better outcomes. So with that, I will end my testimony, but I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bozen. Mr. Clerk, do you have any items?
I do, Madam President. Thank you very much. Amendments to be printed from Senator Dorn to LB 1108, Senator Brewer to LB 287, and Senator Clements to LB 1412. Senator DeBoer, new A bill, Legislative Bill 904A. It's a bill for enacting new appropriations to appropriate funds to aid in carrying out the provisions of Legislative Bill 904. New A bill for Senator John Kavanaugh, Legislative Bill 1204A. Bill for enacting new appropriations to appropriate funds to aid in carrying out the provisions of Legislative Bill 1204. And new A bill from Senator McDonald, LB 644A. It's a bill for enacting new appropriations to appropriate funds to aid in carrying out the provisions of Legislative Bill 644 to declare an emergency. Additionally, Madam President, notice that the Banking Committee will have an exec session at 3 o'clock under the South Balcony. Banking Committee under the South Balcony, 3 o'clock exec session. That's all I have this time, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Moser, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, and good afternoon, colleagues and Nebraskans that follow your legislature and all our activities. I wanted to talk just a little bit about the funds in the budget that were earmarked for the Department of Roads. I was talking to the Director of Transportation earlier this morning about those, and her indication was that they had $100 million shortfall in their maintenance fund for overlays of roads, and the 20 million would go very handily toward that, and that they could spend it in the allotted time and in the proper method to qualify for that spending. And then I guess I'd also like to ask Senator Clements if he would respond to a question.
Senator Clements, will you yield?
Yes.
And Senator Clements, did you have further information on the $50 million that was in the budget for Department of Transportation?
Yes, there is what we call the JEDI Fund, which was, we call it Lake I-80. It had $100 million for eastern Nebraska flooding and lake projects. And that money we have transferred, that's a cash fund. $50 million of that cash fund that was not going to be used has been transferred, is in the budget to transfer to Department of Transportation. That was 50 of it. And then the ARPA funds were in addition to that. But that was state dollars of the $50 million.
Okay, thank you, Senator Clements. So also the Department of Transportation Director indicated that they had $500 million worth of projects in the pipeline for this summer, and that extra funding will help them move along through some of those projects. At $50 million, if that's allotted to Department of Transportation, would pay for 10% of those projects. So those would move those forward. I would yield any time I have left to Senator Clements.
Senator Clements, you're yielded 2 minutes, 36 seconds.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator Dorn. Yes, I have visited with the fiscal office, and they did also say that their Department of Transportation has contracted over $500 million of construction projects to begin this summer, and some are multi-year projects, but they currently have $181 million balance in the roads operation cash fund, and the $50 million transfer would make it $230 million. The ARPA funds would raise it to $250. But the $181 million of available out of $500 million of contracts, they're $319 million short. So the $50 million of cash fund and $20 million of ARPA funds. I also got a list of ARPA projects. They have listed 6 projects that can be done in time for ARPA spending of $17.2 million. And then I was told $3 million more for the Department of Aeronautics that they would like to spend. So they do have plans for the $20 million of ARPA. In the governor's recommendation, he had asked for $35 million to go to the Department of Transportation for ARPA funding.
1 minute.
We used $15 million. And the committee did spread it around a little bit for some other bills and bill requests, and it left $20 million balance. So I do thank the Department of Roads or Transportation for letting me know about that. I'm working with the fiscal office also. They do have some out-year projections that Senator Walz was requesting. And they're going to provide me with some more information beyond fiscal year 2027. And we'll be discussing those as we can. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senators Clements and Dorn. Senator Duncan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I apologize for missing my time when I was up last time. I think a few people ahead of me might have punched out, and I unfortunately missed my time in the queue. So I wanted to come back and pick up where I left off a little bit before. I understand it's kind of piecemeal having this conversation about different issues, but I just want to finish up a little of what I was saying with regard to court interpreters and then get a little bit more into detail about some other issues on the budget that I find concerning or that I have questions about. At the end of the day, when we're actually talking about court interpreters, I get the question often of like, why does this actually matter, right? Are there really that many people that don't speak English? Or, I'm sure we have interpreting services that can work. But the reality of the situation is, in my time working in the courts, there are countless individuals that go through the court system who don't speak English either less than well or even at all. And it's hard enough for the average person to understand what's happening in the court process when they do speak English, let alone trying to explain it to somebody who doesn't speak the language. I have clients, or I've had clients all the time, who I'll be trying to explain sort of the way the process works or the way that we kind of go through the steps. And even if they speak English, it's difficult. And so I'm reminded of the countless clients that I've had who unfortunately showed up to court ready to go and ready to dispose of their case and have it done so we could stop having hearings and save the taxpayers' dollars. But unfortunately, because we've had so few court interpreters be able to be in the courts and so few court interpreters stretched over such far distances, I have had numerous times, countless times, where people have simply had to have their cases continued because there just wasn't an interpreter available. And that's a huge problem because then you kick things down the road and things just get complicated for everybody. In addition to that, when you do have interpreters that are available, oftentimes anymore, because they're stretched over such a far geographic space, you end up with them on Zoom. Now, that's fine for some things, right? If you're appearing in court and you just want to continue your case and you've already had a chance to talk to your client ahead of time by virtue of hiring an interpreter outside to have that conversation, it's fine if they're over Zoom. But in the very likely chance that you want to pull your client aside into the hallway and have a conversation with them about what's going on, you can't do that if that interpreter's on Zoom. That's not possible. Or in an effort to try to make it possible, you'll do this. So this actually happened to me about a month ago. I showed up in court and I had a client who spoke Vietnamese, didn't speak any English whatsoever. And we tried to communicate about what was going on. And unfortunately, we were unable to have a conversation, I think, that really resulted in anything happening. So the court continued that case to about 2 weeks down the road to try to give us a chance to speak. That in and of itself was complicated because the client didn't understand what was happening. After that, I struggled to find an interpreter who actually had the time or the ability to meet with me and my client in person, let alone on computer, to explain what was going on. So we showed up again 2 weeks later, thinking that an interpreter was going to be in the courtroom and that we could have a conversation about what was happening and I could find out how they wanted to proceed with their matter. Unfortunately, the only interpreter that was available appeared on Zoom. And that's not on them. They're doing 18 different things that day, so they appeared in Zoom. I needed to have a chance to talk with my client. So what I did was I somehow got my client to kind of understand that we had to leave the room and go upstairs. So we went to a different floor of the courthouse, went into a conference room, and I got my cell phone out and I logged on to the Zoom call that the court was on. And then we got put into a breakout room with the interpreter, with me with my phone on speaker placed between me and my client. And this court interpreter had to then interpret over Zoom, over my phone, complicated legal matters while we talked about what this client was going to do with a case that probably could affect very serious parts of their life.
1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. At the end of that conversation, we were able to figure it out, and it took a long time and probably ended up costing a little bit more money for that interpreter than it could have been, but we were able to kind of struggle our way through it, but that's not how our court system should work. That is not how we should be doing things in our court systems. And that is a direct result of the fact that we do not have the ability right now to pay our interpreters a living wage to make this competitive to have them in the courtrooms. And so we're not just not getting new interpreters, we are bleeding interpreters to other sectors. So more and more, you're going to hear stories like that of people who are making consequential legal decisions based on this piecemeal game of telephone. And that is not the way that our system should work. And we owe Nebraskans better. And in fact, we're constitutionally obliged to do them better. So I hope we address this issue soon. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Duncan. Senator Wang, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will Senator Duncan yield to a question?
Senator Duncan, will you yield?
Yes.
Are you on banking?
I am in banking.
Oh, okay. Will Senator Kavanaugh yield to a question? You can go ahead, Senator Duncan, back to.
Thank you.
Which Kavanaugh, Senator Wang?
Michaela.
Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, will you yield?
Come on down. Yes.
Would you like some more time? I'm working on an appeal that I got to get done today.
I would
so
love some more time.
Okay, thank you. I yield my time to Senator Michaela Kavanaugh.
Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're yielded 4 minutes, 14 seconds.
Thank you. I was not prepared for more time, but State Visitors Promotion Cash Fund. Created, uses, transfers, investment. The State Visitors Promotion Cash Fund is created. The fund shall be administered by the commission. The fund shall consist of revenue deposits into the fund pursuant to Section 81-3715 and money donated as gifts, bequests, or other contributions from public or private entities. Before I go on, because I will forget if I don't, artfarmnebraska.org is the art farm, and I did send a link out to the Nebraska Public TV story about it to everyone, and I think I did use the right link that included all of the staff because there's like 2 different ones. It's legstaff.org. minus senator, all ledge staff. Yes. There's two. It's very confusing. Sometimes it's like just the staff that's for the senator staff, and then there's one that's all of the staff because there's staff that aren't just the senator staff. Anyways, that's housekeeping. But you all should have a link to the video about the art farm. I highly recommend you check it out. Okay, back to State Visitors Promotion Cash Fund. Funds made available by any department or agency of the United States may also be credited to the fund if so directed by such department or agency. The commission shall use the proceeds of the fund to generally promote, encourage, and attract visitors to and within the state of Nebraska, to erect and replace highway tourism markers, to enhance the use of travel and tourism facilities within the state, to provide grants to communities and organizations, and to contract with the Department of Administrative Services to provide support services to the commission, including but not limited to accounting and personnel functions. So this is the State Visitors Promotion Fund. And we are, let's see here, taking, that's the State Settlement Fund. State Visitors Promotion Fund, $5 million from that fund. This was what Senator Jacobson was talking about. Okay, I think he knows it's coming. Would Senator Clements yield to a question?
Senator Clements, will you yield?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Clements. I'm trying to give you more time by reading about the fund first. So we're taking $5 million from the State Visitors Fund. Why don't they need that money?
This was a governor's request. It wasn't even in the gold book. The governor has said that he has more confidence in DED doing a statewide promotion than tourism.
1 minute.
And so the governor has asked, he wants to spend $5 million on statewide promotion is the word he used. And asked for a transfer from this fund for that
And the
similar purpose.
It's the Commission on Tourism? It says administered by the commission. I assume that's
There is a tourism commission, yes.
Okay. And does the Tourism Commission, are they an independent commission?
Yes,
Are they appointed by the governor?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yes,
And then confirmed by us?
yes.
Not that you, I'm asking you a lot of,
That's somebody else's committee.
yeah, I'm asking Senator Clements some questions that are totally out of his purview. But, you know, you've been here longer than me. Maybe you know the
I'll
answers.
say to the best of my knowledge.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it sounds,
It is shifting funds to a different agency, but for a similar purpose.
are there going to be?
Time, Senator?
Oh, thank you, Senator Clements and Senator Wayne.
Thank you, Senators Michaela Kavanaugh, Senator Wayne, and Senator Clements. Senator Dover, you're recognized.
Thank you. I just wanted to briefly say that as far as with the Department of Transportation, that they do also will send 3.1 million for airports. And basically what they do is they help supplement the airports across the state. So I don't know if anyone spoke to that, but I think it's very important that we do have regional airports, and DOT is charged with helping those airports. Also, they have ARPA projects estimated around 17 million. Here's a list of just $17 million worth. So basically it's Highway 4, Table Rock and Steinhauer, Highway 6, Grafton area, Highway 39, 22, L63A and Genoa area, Highway 183, Sargent North, Highway 23, Madrid Lincoln County line, and Spur 16B and 16F, Hackberry Lane and Ninsel. So they really do help across the state. And I'm very appreciative of any ARPA funds that helps with the roads. I really think that roads are a responsibility of state and federal governments. I'd also like to talk to, as far as the contract I had spoke to recently and thinking it was a performance contract, what it actually is, it's structured in a way that if the party of the contract does not perform, it's renewed on an annual basis. So basically, it's a type of performance because we don't have to spend the full amount But if it seems as though the company is not performing, not finding the 3% and 6% as we're targeted this year and next year, we would simply, in appropriations, just not appropriate those funds. And also, the last thing I'd like to speak to is the translators in the court system. It is my understanding that in our discussion with the Supreme Court agency, that they had adequate funds. And I think it's really important to explain to everyone that just because perhaps funds were taken this year or perhaps other funds, a lot of times people come to appropriations and say, we'd like funds for this. So let's just say the translators, the court translators, they want funds. There was a bill, and we met with the agency, and from the documents provided to us, from the budget provided to us, we believe there was adequate funds to fund that. And so next, we'll be into doing the budget again next year. And so we would expect that Senator Dungan, or whoever would bring the bill, but probably Senator Dungan, I understand he's passionate about, would bring a bill to us in appropriations, and we would sit down again and look at this. We did not in any way say that it wasn't important or that it didn't need to be funded. We just felt as though in discussions with fiscal office reports and that agency that there was adequate funds to fund it. So we would be more than willing to sit down with the next budget, and it's quite possible that we would need to appropriate funds for this. And for what it's worth, one of my two majors, one was finance, so I'm on budget, and there was Spanish. So I understand the importance. I am bilingual, and we need to make sure there are people that can translate. Again, as the senator pointed out, it's very, very important in those situations that they're able to translate the full meaning of the words, and it gets somewhat complicated in the court system. So we felt as though there was adequate funds to fund the interpreters this year, and would be more than welcome to readdress that in the coming budget and see what needs to be done. But again, having conversation with the agency, we felt as though there was adequate funds. I yield the rest of my time to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dover. Senator Dungan, you're recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Madam President. And I want to thank Senator Dover for speaking to that. I know there's been a lot of cooks in the kitchen when it comes to the budget. I know it's a very difficult process. And so I want to again extend my appreciation to the Appropriations Committee for the hard work they've done. I guess I would just to respond briefly to some of the comments that were made. My understanding from speaking with the Supreme Court and the folks who work for them and the folks who are in charge of their budgets, specifically the Language Access Division, is that the current cash funds that are sitting there are not necessarily sufficient in order to increase the pay raise or even maintain the pay raise where it's at. And so I believe at the hearing that I had for the underlying bill, they did come in and request this additional funding. I think part of the disconnect here is that there is a cash fund that the Supreme Court maintains, which they utilize to pay for different services. There was sort of a concern that that cash fund was growing over a period of time. And I shared that concern. If the money's there, then we should be using it for things like we should be using it for. But what I've learned from talking with a number of people involved in that entire process is that the cash fund essentially was artificially inflated by virtue of COVID because there was less money being utilized by probation services. So because of that artificial inflation, there was more carryover than is normal, which I think gave the indication that there was some, for lack of a better way to put it, hoarding of money that wasn't actually happening. Now, in addition to that, there's multiple projects the Supreme Court has been tasked with completing or are planning on completing sometime in the future. One of those, as we've already talked about, is the Court Improvement Project, wherein they are going around the entire state, essentially, and modernizing and updating courtrooms and services to ensure they actually work with modern technology. That is a very costly endeavor, and it's one that the bulk of that cash fund is going to go towards. If we deplete that cash fund first, what that ultimately means is the court's going to have to come back in with some massive budget ask, and they're going to say, we need X amount of money to continue to both do the Court Improvement Project and pay our interpreters and, as Chief Justice Heavican said during his State of the Judiciary speech, essentially cobble together or put together an entirely new database system that's going to cost millions, if not tens of millions of dollars. My concern, and the concern that I think many others have here, is that if they come to us, the legislature, with that large of an ask, it's going to cause a lot of people concern and heartburn and maybe not give that amount of money. So right now, when we are enjoying essentially one of the I guess best times financially we've heard that from a lot of people, it would seem to me that now is the time to bring that additional money. I did bring a bill last year to increase the base rate and pay for the interpreters, or to appropriate that money into the Supreme Court budget in order to continuously ensure there would be additional funding. Unfortunately, that didn't make it into the budget. We then amended it into the budget, and then that was then vetoed and taken out. So this, what we're talking about right now with interpreters, if we were to get to that amendment, is essentially a Band-Aid on the problem. I admit that. It doesn't fix everything moving forward. But this is an acute problem that needs to be addressed. We saw what happened when the court interpreters weren't able to work and had a work stoppage during the summer. It was a huge problem. And I stood right here last year and said, if we don't do something about this, that's going to happen. And then it happened. And I had to spend months with a bunch of other people trying to figure out what was going to happen. And this idea that we need this $600,000 injection is part of that entire piece together solution for at least the interim until we do get to next year. So I believe Senator Dover is exactly correct. We are going to have to address this next year, and I do intend to bring a bill to the Appropriations Committee with a specific ask and increase to ensure the court interpreters can maintain their pay, if not get a pay increase to make them actually keep up with cost of living and inflation. But unfortunately,
1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. I do appreciate how you wait till there's a pause in what I'm saying, so I'm sorry for just going on and on. But I think that unfortunately we don't have the opportunity here today to address the problem beyond what we can do with this one-time injection. So the court interpreter issue is real. I'm not just sounding off the alarms for no reason. It's been something that's been on the forefront of my sort of purview for this entire interim since we ended this last session. It's been something I've been working on this entire session as well. I was very sad to see it not included in the budget, but we can still do something about it here, colleagues. And so my hope is, whether it's now or between general and select, we can come up with some amount of money that will ensure our court interpreters can continue to maintain a living wage and actually maintain their employment. So with that, colleagues, I appreciate the conversation we've been having. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Dungeon. Senator Walz, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I have a couple more questions, this time about highways and the transportation fund. So I was wondering if Senator Clements would yield to some questions.
Senator Clements, will you yield?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Clements. I don't know what I was doing, but I could kind of hear you talking about the transportation and the funding for transportation. And I just wanted to know if you could relay that information.
Yes, a fiscal analyst just gave me this breakdown that they have, NDOT has contracted over $500 million of projects beginning this summer. Some of those will be multi-years, but they have $181 million available in their roads operation cash fund. And then what I said was, we allocated in the budget $50 million from what we call the JEDI cash fund, which I call Lake I-80. So we're adding $50 million of cash to them. And then the $20 million of ARPA projects, they gave me a list that they have 6 projects that would qualify for ARPA, totaling $17.2 million. And was also told that they could use $3 million on the Department of Aeronautics for state airports. That would be $20 million where they thinking they could spend the $20 million. But the $181 million currently with 500 of contracts is $319 million short. The $50 million would help toward that, but they'll still be short.
Okay, so currently, this would not allow the Department of Transportation to complete the highway projects that we've been waiting on for quite some time.
There's still a backlog, yes. Although I believe they will have federal matching funds that would help out as well.
Right. But they were projected to finish those projects in 2035, and now the new projection would be 2042, I think.
I think you're right. I'm not on that committee, but it's quite a few years out there.
Yeah, and it's already been, as you know, 30, 40 years that we've been waiting for those projects to be completed. I had another question. Sorry, Senator Clements. I might have to ask you off the mic. I can't remember. I'm sorry. I'll yield my time back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Walls and Senator Clements. Senator Dover, you're recognized.
Thank you. I just want to speak to something that Senator Dungan had brought up as far as a surplus emerging in the agency due to the fact that during COVID they had positions that were unfilled. I just want to, I'm sure this has already been said on the floor, but I want everyone to understand that that didn't happen just in the Supreme Court agency, that happened in all agencies. So I really think that if we have a situation that happened over the years where they weren't able to fill positions and a surplus built up, I think it only makes sense to take that surplus and fund things such as interpreters, court interpreters, and other things, or take that money to front load property tax relief so that the taxpayers of Nebraska can actually get that relief early instead of having to wait because we pay tax payments in arrears, having to wait a full year to see any tax relief. So I really think it makes sense that if a surplus built up due to the fact that they didn't actually pay, they're receiving appropriated funds for positions that were not filled. I think it only makes sense that we come in and ask them to use that surplus funds that were not spent to cover other expenses. And then once that surplus is spent, I think it only makes sense then that we as Appropriations Committee would sit down and be willing to listen to any requests for appropriated funds. I yield the rest of my time to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dover. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to close on your motion.
Thank you, Madam President. I think we have 17 minutes because we have an excellent timekeeper up front who said we were going to 3:40. So my math skills aren't amazing, but I think that's 17 minutes from now. So I don't want to disrupt what people are doing. Lots of committees are having mad dash executive sessions, so I'm not going to take us to a vote on this. But just so everyone is aware, in 17 minutes, you are going to have to come vote for cloture on the budget. Senator Clements has been very gracious with his time and answering my questions. So the question I was about to ask him when I was on the mic the last time about the Visitors Promotion Fund is how much money they have left in the fund. And on page 20 of the Green Appropriations book, it says that the balance will be, after the appropriation of the 5 million, the balance will be 1.6 million. So I'd be interested to know what their budgets are like typically, but it is funded by a Nebraska lodging tax revenue. 1% of that goes into the Tourism Commission account. I haven't figured out yet, and of course, I appreciate Senator Clements answering the question or attempting to, but if the Commission on Tourism is appointed by the governor and confirmed by the legislature, so that's one thing that I want to find an answer to sooner rather than later. Okay, so that was that fund. I find these funds to be very fascinating because they are a historical document of the legislature, and they are reflective of ideas of former legislatures and projects that they brought forward. The Civic and Community Center Fund is an interesting fund because it is primarily funded by the larger populated centers like Omaha, Ralston, Lincoln, probably somewhere in Kearney. And there is the 30% of the sales tax goes into that fund to fund smaller communities. And as a result, we all benefit from that because we have a cultural enrichment across the state. And that's a beautiful thing. And one senator came and asked me about this. Does Omaha get upset about the fact that this 30% of this goes into funding these community projects across the state? No, because a lot of things are funded by the taxes that are collected in Omaha and Lincoln. But also, these are collected from people coming from across the state to events in Omaha and Lincoln, and from people coming out of state, especially, College World Series, things like that. So it's something that should benefit all of us. So at least from my perspective, I guess I can't speak for the whole city of Omaha. From my perspective, it makes sense. It's an investment in the whole state, and everyone is contributing to that. I bring this up because I think the entire budget should have that approach. It shouldn't be what's good for this group or good for this group. We need to consider the state as a whole and do what is good for the health of the state. And sometimes—
1 minute.
Thank you. That is going to be things that impact Omaha more, because Omaha is a large tax base. And so we have to invest in that, and we have to secure that, because that helps fund a lot of things across the state. So having a diverse workforce that is supported is important. I'm going to continue, but right now I am going to pull my bracket motion and we'll go to my next thing.
Without objection, so approved. Mr. Clerk, for the next motion.
Madam President, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh would move to recommit the bill to the Appropriations Committee.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to open.
Okay, friends, I can take 10 minutes, but if anybody has anything left that they would like to discuss about the budget, you have 13 minutes. So if you get in the queue, I will stop talking, because I don't want to take away from any further conversation that people would have. So I want to make sure that we have that opportunity to have a conversation. I see that Senator Armendariz just got in the queue. So I will finish my last thought from previously, and that was the health of the state benefits all of us. And so when we look at this document, when we look at this budget, we need to be looking at it very holistically. And I very much appreciate all of the time that Senator Clements has given me over the last 2 days on this bill. And I'm very appreciative to the fiscal analysts who are sitting over here who answer a lot of my questions as well. And I will yield the remainder of my time to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh. Senator Armendariz, you're recognized.
Thank you, and thank you, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh. This is to follow up on some questions she had about the audit contract. I want to thank her for providing the copy of that contract for us, but I did review it quickly. I did go to the statement of work, and it does have an intent in there of a 25% improvement done by this audit company in the overall functioning of the 75 agencies it's auditing. And then down further, it does specify the first year they're to find 3% improvement with the general fund of the appropriation to the general fund. And then the following year, they're to find another 6% improvement. So just to clarify that for everybody, that it is clarified in the contract that there is an intent to have those improvements made. I also did see that there is a termination clause for convenience, meaning the state can terminate the contract at any time. And then also we on appropriations can just not appropriate the funds each biennium. So there are several protections here to not continue paying this contract over time. I just wanted everybody to be secure in that. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Armendariz. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. So we do have 10 minutes left. So if anybody else does feel moved to speak or wants to give me more time, I will take more time because this recommit is going to stay on the board until we go to cloture. So I will appreciate the time. Okay, and I was caught unawares for a moment. So thank you to Senator McDonald, who came over to talk to me about the tourism board, and Senator Clements was right. Excellent guess, or it was an educated guess, I would say, an informed guess that yes, the tourism board is appointed and confirmed. So there we have, that mystery has been solved. I better get back in the queue. Yeah, I have noticed that this particular queue system, so for those who aren't inside of this chamber, this is new. Last year was a white background with black font, and it didn't sit here, it sat here, and it was impossible to read from where I am, like impossible. Right now I can see that there are two people in the queue, and because my eyesight isn't great, I can't see who they are, but I know one is me. So, because I also have the longest name. Oh, Clements, yes, the other is Clements. I have the longest name. Well, actually, no, I do still have the longest name because Senator John Kavanaugh John is shorter than Michaela. So I do have the longest name, I think. Maybe Von Gillen might be in competition because I assume Brad is short for Bradley, Bradford, Bradson, Bradford. You should join HHS, where we have Bo Ballard, and then we have Ben. We have Bo, Ben, and then our legal counsel is Benson, and our research analyst is Bryson. Ben, Bo, Bryson, Benson, Bradford. That would say that 20 times real fast. I do have more to say. I'm just at that point of where I've been talking that I'm a little goofy. So, and I need to grab my stuff. John Frederickson? Oh, is his name longer? Yes, it is. It's just when it's in the queue over there, I can always tell that it's either myself or the other Senator Kavanaugh because, well, there's the initials are on there, but oh, so what I was saying about the queue machine is that this is easier to read, but I still don't have a great time reading it from this distance. And I, from time to time, do use my opera glasses, but I won't hold them up because that would be a prop. But my opera glasses that the other Senator Kavanaugh got me because I complained about reading the queue so much last year. And I would like to note he was so thoughtful that they are in rose gold. So he's a good brother, that one. Okay, back to what we have at hand. And I'm going to get out and get back in so that Senator Clements can go before me because I don't want us to run out of time for him to talk. Okay, cash funds. So where were we? I apologize. Why do I keep closing this book? Okay, the records management cash fund is $3 million, and that is with the Department.
1 minute.
Thank you, Treasury. And then there's the Revenue Enforcement Fund, which is $4 million and $1 million. And that is another fund that I have been interested in because I do get concerned when we are taking money away from funds that are supposed to be used for enforcement. And if we don't need those funds, if we are overfunding that particular fund, I understand why we would take money from it. But again, we need to analyze, are we overcharging the people of Nebraska who are paying into these funds? That seems to be a running theme, is that we have a lot of cash funds that have a lot of excess funds in them that are funded by fees and taxes. And perhaps we need to evaluate what we are charging to the people of Nebraska. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Senator Clements, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you for giving me some time, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. And I've just had about 4 items that I wanted to review. Would Senator Duncan yield to a question? Is he available? Would Senator John Kavanaugh yield to a question?
Senator John Kavanaugh, will you yield?
Yes.
Senator John Kavanaugh, if I was able to put in the budget a earmark to earmark court interpreter money has been requested, would you support that?
I would certainly be happy to make sure that we're funding court interpreters in any way possible. And I do appreciate your willingness to work and find a workaround solution. I can't speak for anybody else or Senator Duncan in particular, but I appreciate the work to get court interpreters funded at that level that we're talking about. And I would support an amendment that would do that, yes.
Thank you. I am working, trying to find a way that we can earmark the existing funds. We're still saying they have $8 million of operating funds, and I would like for them to use it for court interpreters, and we're looking into an earmark in the budget. Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. The next item, we've been talking about the lodging tax in the Tourism Commission, and I had received an email that I found of the revenues they've been receiving for the last 10 years. They've been receiving $5 million a year roughly, except in 2022 fiscal year, 6.7 million, in 2023, 7.8 million. And so their tourism, I'm glad the tourism lodging tax is up. We're getting more people in lodging, and hopefully they're from out of state. But the revenues they're receiving are adequate. Removing $5 million of that, the budget report says they'll have 1.6 million left, but they'll probably have at least $5, $6, $7 million. We're not taking all their money. They'll have new revenue this coming year. Then on the ARPA money for the Department of Transportation, I did get a memo that there are not $3 million worth of ARPA projects available for aeronautics. And so I believe that the Department of Transportation for roads will have enough ability to spend the full 20 million, as the governor had recommended 35 million, but it's not going to go for aeronautics. Just want to make a correction there. Then we've been talking some about developmental disability, and that, let me find it. That was a bill that we had in committee. There it is. And in speaking with the CEO of HHS, CEO Corsi, he was reminding me that the 2023 budget increased funding for developmental disability by 26%. And of that, 9% of that was ARPA dollars that will last through 2026. 17% of that was general funds that raises their base. And in addition, there's 2% additional provider increase. Thank you. Additional provider increase starting this year or the following, I think it's following year, another 2% increase. And so their base has been increased, and the ARPA money they have been allocated to go through 2026. But the 26% last year was an effort to try to catch them up. And we can allocate the money, and it's up to the agency to make sure it's spent. And I urge them to find ways to make sure it is distributed. So looks like we're going to be getting close to a vote. So I'll end that. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Clements. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President, colleagues. This is the end of the road for 1412. I I do want to talk about tourism, but I will do it on the next bill because I got a letter from one of Senator Lowe's constituents that I want to share. So with that, I will pull my motion to recommit. Thank you.
Without objection, so ordered. Mr. Clerk, for a motion on your desk.
Madam President, Speaker Arch would move to invoke cloture on LB 1412 pursuant to Rule 7, Section 10.
Speaker Arch, for what purpose do you rise?
Call the House.
There's been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
25 ayes, 3 nays, placed House under call, Madam President.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, please check in. Senator Bosselman, Reapy, Moser, Hardin, and Day, please return to the chamber. The House is under call. All unexcused members are now present. The first vote, colleagues, is the motion to invoke cloture. A roll call vote has been requested. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Senator Aguilar, Senator Albright, voting yes. Senator Arch, voting yes. Senator Armendariz, voting yes. Senator Ballard, voting yes. Senator Blood, voting no. Senator Boston, voting yes. Senator Bostar, voting yes. Senator Bostelman, voting yes. Senator Brandt, voting yes. Senator Brewer, voting yes. Senator John Kavanaugh, not voting. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, not voting. Senator Clements, voting yes. Senator Conrad, voting yes. Senator Day, not voting. Senator DeBoer, voting yes. Senator DeKay, voting yes. Senator Dorn, voting yes. Senator Dover, voting yes. Senator Dungan, not voting. Senator Erdman, voting yes. Senator Frederickson, voting yes. Senator Holleran, voting yes. Senator Hansen, Senator Hardin, voting yes. Senator Holcroft, voting yes. Senator Hughes, voting yes. Senator Hunt, voting no. Senator Ibach, voting yes. Senator Jacobson, voting yes. Senator Kauth, voting yes. Senator Linehan, voting yes. Senator Lippincott, voting yes. Senator Lowe, voting yes. Senator McDonald, voting yes. Senator McKinney, voting no. Senator Meyer, voting yes. Senator Mosier, voting yes. Senator Merman, voting yes. Senator Raybold, Senator Reapy, voting yes. Senator Sanders, voting yes. Senator Slama, voting yes. Senator Vargas, voting yes. Senator Von Gillern, voting yes. Senator Walls, voting yes. Senator Wayne, voting no. Senator Wishart, voting yes. Vote is 38 ayes, 4 nays, 4 present, not voting, Madam President.
Cloture is invoked. Colleagues, the next vote is the adoption of AM 2566. All in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Have all voted who would care to? Mr. Clerk, please record.
39 ayes, 3 nays on adoption of the committee amendments, Madam President.
The amendment is adopted. The next question is the advancement to E&R initial of LB 1412. A roll call vote has been requested. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Senator Aguilar, Senator Albright, voting yes. Senator Arch, voting yes. Senator Armendariz, voting yes. Senator Ballard, voting yes. Senator Blood, voting yes. Senator Boston, voting yes. Senator Bostar, voting yes. Senator Bostelman, voting yes. Senator Brandt, voting yes. Senator Brewer, voting yes. Senator John Kavanaugh, not voting. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, voting no. Senator Clements, voting yes. Senator Conrad, voting yes. Senator Day, not voting. Senator DeBoer, voting yes. Senator DeKay, voting yes. Senator Dorn, voting yes. Senator Dover, voting yes. Senator Dungan, voting yes. Senator Erdman, voting yes. Senator Frederickson, voting yes. Senator Holleran, voting yes. Senator Hansen, Senator Hardin, voting yes. Senator Holcroft, voting yes. Senator Hughes, not voting. Senator Hunt, voting no. Senator Ibaugh, voting yes. Senator Jacobson, voting yes. Senator Kauth, voting yes. Senator Linehan, voting yes. Senator Lippincott, voting yes. Senator Lowe, voting yes. Senator McDonald, voting yes. Senator McKinney, voting no. Senator Meyer, voting yes. Senator Mosier, voting yes. Senator Merman, voting yes. Senator Raybold, Senator Reapy, voting yes. Senator Sanders, voting yes. Senator Slama, voting yes. Senator Vargas, voting yes. Senator Von Gillern, voting yes. Senator Walls, voting yes. Senator Wayne, voting no. Senator Wishart, voting yes. Vote is 39 ayes, 4 nays, Madam President, on advancement of the bill.
The bill is advanced. Mr. Clerk, for the next item. I raise the call.
Madam President, some items quickly. Your Committee on Enrollment Review reports Legislative Bill 685, 844, 857, 1035, 1394, 1394A as correctly engrossed and placed on final reading. Amendments to be printed, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh to LB 1412. And Senator Frederickson, LB 1412. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh to LB 14. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh to LB 1413. Your Committee on Enrollment Review reports Legislative Bill 904, 1120, 1004, 262, and 867 to select files, some having E&R amendments. Your Committee on Revenue, chaired by Senator Linehan, reports Legislative Bill 126 to general file with committee amendments. Your Committee on Natural Resources, chaired by Senator Bostelman, reports Legislative Bill 1335 to general file with committee amendments. Notice a committee hearing from the Revenue Committee and a gubernatorial report, a committee report and a gubernatorial appointment to the Department of Economic Development. Madam President, as it concerns the agenda, Legislative Bill 1413, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh would move to indefinitely postpone the bill pursuant to Rule 6, Section 3F.
Senator Clements, you're recognized to open on the bill.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to thank again the Appropriations Committee members and the fiscal analysts for their hard work on this bill since we started in January. LB 1413 is the governor's mid-biennium funds transfer bill for the cash reserve and other cash funds. The Appropriation Committee advanced LB 1413 to general file with Committee Amendment 2698 on a 9-0 vote. And the cash reserve and the cash funds items are again in the Shamrock green folder here. Just as a reminder, the cash fund transfers start on page 19, and then following that, that's a listing of them, and then the details with a paragraph on each one. It's pages 20 and following. The cash transfers that were requested by the governor totaled $273 million. And the total you'll find in the amendment. When we get to the amendment, we approved $244 million. But LB 1413 is a companion to the budget, which is part of our budget that we need to pass each year. And some of the funding in the general funds comes from cash transfers. And that will end my remarks on LB 1413, and I'll speak on the amendment when the time comes. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Clements. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to open on your motion.
Thank you, Madam President. Good afternoon, colleagues. I think it's a nice afternoon. I went outside for a minute on the balcony today, and it was really lovely, but it was literally for, well, it was probably 2 minutes and like 13 seconds, but not very long. So these are the cash transfers. This is it, friends. This is where the money is coming from. We have to transfer the funds from the funds to the general fund. If we don't, then the bill that just moved gets a little bit more sticky. So, LB 1413. This is where we see the funds going into general funds. And if you have it printed off, or if you have it up on your computer, you can see section by section. It is section 4, line 18, page 1, $3 million from the records management cash fund to general fund. Section 5, line 23, $2.5 million from the employment security special contingent fund to the general fund. And then the next page, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 transfers to the general fund. And then there's 2 additional transfers. There's one for $20 million from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to the Rural Workforce Housing Fund, and then $5 million for the following year. No, for the same year, but for some reason it's, I'm sure there's a reason that I don't understand. Okay, and then I submitted an amendment to this bill that was on page 48. And I'm going to give him a heads up. I'm going to ask Senator Clements a question in just a minute. So on page 48 of this bill, of the bill, lines 25 through 28, it says, beginning on June 30, 2025, and each June 30 thereafter, the state treasurer shall transfer all earnings on the Nebraska Telecommunications Service Fund, less any transfers made to the 211 cash fund in such fiscal year to the general fund. Would Senator Clements yield to a question?
Senator Clements, will you yield?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Clements. So the way I read this is that this is a permanent change to the allocation of the excess of the Universal Service Fund.
That is the request. The governor's recommendation was to take $11,250,000 off of this fiscal year and $2 million in the next fiscal year and in the future. Whatever the interest amount, they were kind of estimating 2 million, but it does say all of the interest except for the amount that's allocated for the 211 service fund that Senator McDonald has sponsored.
But can we permanently allocate these funds through an appropriation cast fund transfer in a mid-biennium adjustment without a hearing?
Yes, we can.
Should we?
Well, that's the request, and the fund has over $100 million in it.
Yes.
And it's been building up, and the argument is whether you're really going to spend it for this purpose, or is the interest going to be just sitting there building up?
And the purpose of this fund is...
The purpose, you're asking me?
Well,
Yes.
I know what the purpose is.
Yes.
Do you?
It's part of your phone bill. There's a fee on your phone bill.
Yes, there
It will
is.
say the Universal Service Fund. And as I recall, it's currently for companies like Windstream in high-cost areas to build out, say, phone line to a farmer that's 3 miles away. That wouldn't be cost-effective for a company, but then they can apply for these funds for high-cost areas that need some extra subsidy.
Yes. And do you see why that might be a problem to sweep that fund?
I'm sure expenses are going up for maintaining phone lines.
Well, even though the fund is growing, yes, expenses are going up, but the intention of that fund is to serve unserved and underserved areas. And we've had an issue in getting that to happen, but that is something that the Transportation and Telecommunications Committee has been working on for a long time in partnership with many of the telecom companies and the Public Service Commission to try and work to get that moved forward. And now we have the BEAD program, the broadband program, that's under the Department of Transportation that is also working on this. And so we've got a lot of moving pieces here. And you might recall last year when I flagged that we went after money in the Universal Service Fund. That time it was the actual fund, not the excess. But my concern is that we are taking money out of a fund when all of these other pieces are working to make sure that we get broadband everywhere possible in the state. And I have heard from numerous rural communities how important it is for us to get broadband because technology is making efficiencies in agriculture. So are we certain that this is the best use of the Universal Service Excess Fund?
Currently, it looks like it has excess funds. The future, we'll see if they spend them or not. They have a history of spending.
Did the Public Service Commission give you any feedback on taking this money?
I believe they were not supportive.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you again, Senator Clements. You are once again very gracious in answering my questions. I would imagine that they would not be supportive because this is actually under their purview. And last year we took out of their purview the broadband, the BEAD program, which is a federal program, but the Universal Service Fund also has some federal implications as well. And yes, it is the excess. So that gives us a little bit more flexibility than the underlying fund. But the excess should be used to serve the unserved and underserved areas. And believe it or not, we have substantial unserved and underserved areas in Omaha that could use these funds. And I know all of you have areas in your districts that could use these funds. So it concerns me that we are taking money that is really the only money that is dedicated to technological advances in this state and putting it in the general fund. And not only doing that, but putting it in the general fund in perpetuity through page 48, lines 25 through 28 of AM 2698 of LB 1413.
1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. So I'm a bit protective of this one, and it does concern me. And I understand what the motivation is in these two bills of sweeping funds to fund whatever is in the budget this year, but these are one-time sweeps. This particular one is not a one-time sweep. This is making this permanent. And I think that that is something that we should be having a broader conversation on, because the Public Service Commission is an elected body and it is under their purview. So we should be talking in concert with them about sweeping this excess fund. And if we have an excess fund that is so great, we should also be talking about the fund, the fees of the fund. Because there have been times.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh. Senator Conrad, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. I rise indifferently in regards to the motion that my friend Senator Cavanaugh has on the board. I think it's hopefully clear to all colleagues and all stakeholders that she filed this in order to structure the debate on the budget motions. This is not signaling some sort of a return to the ongoing consistent filibuster tactics that were utilized last year, but is just one of the tools available to structure the debate on the budget, which is critically important. Because of her protective and/or hostile motions, and dependent upon how you want to describe them or look at them, the amendment that I filed on this measure is quite a bit further down the way. And I know Senator Jacobson has an amendment that's filed as well that's very important in regards to state tourism dollars. But I wanted to flag for the body that I'm proud to work with the business community and entities representing their interests, whether that's small businesses or our largest corporate partners, who we have found a lot of common ground and alignment in regards to, I think, the misguided components of this budget bill that needlessly sweep funds from the unemployment program needlessly. And I want to lift that up and thank the Omaha Chamber, Lincoln Chamber, State Chamber, and the Nebraska Federation of Independent Businesses for their advocacy on this topic at the committee level, continuing to work with myself and other stakeholders who are concerned about this transfer here at this stage of budget deliberations. And if you had ever wondered if our nonpartisan spirit was alive and well in the Nebraska Legislature, I think we're going to have a lot of opportunities to reaffirm that and prove that true, particularly when it comes to our treatment of this proposed fund sweep for the unemployment funds before us. Senator Slama and myself have been working to try and find a big issue that perhaps we could partner together on, and I think we may have finally found our issue to work together on. And we'll thank the Appropriations Committee for bringing us together in that regard. But I think that this is an issue that should have significant and serious debate, because I think that the sweep proposed by the governor's office and by the Appropriations Committee is misguided from both a legal policy or not both, from a legal policy and economic perspective. And we can go through some of the legislative history about why that is. When you look back at how these funds were first established, and I've been fortunate enough to do some of my homework here and to look at the authorizing legislation for the State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, which came through our body back in 1994. And if you look at that authorizing legislation, you can see that there is an incredibly broad group of incredible state leaders that came together with the business community, thank you, Madam President, to establish this trust fund. And it was very intentional to establish this trust fund so that we can literally hold in trust taxes that employers are assessed to be that rainy day, to be that backfill, to be that insurance when times go bad. And so this has been a very thoughtful, very appropriate program to make sure that we're forward filling during good times, that we have appropriate resources available for our unemployment insurance program and for job training purposes. And these funds, colleagues, are literally held in trust. Look at the authorizing statute in Nebraska 48-622.01. This is not a slush fund, a cash fund to be diverted for other purposes. Thank you, Madam President, and I look forward to continuing the debate on this and other topics in LB 1413.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator McKinney, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise in support of the IPP motion and against LB 1413. I thought it was important that this bill has a bunch of cash transfers. I could be wrong, but I think there's about 25 transfers. So I just figured we got time. We might as well say what they are. The first one on page 2 of the committee amendment that got marked as 1, in section 63, the transfer from the Tobacco Settlement Trust Fund to the Healthcare Cash Fund is amended to reduce the amount by $2.5 million in fiscal year 24-25 and $1.25 million each year thereafter. 2, in section 71, transfers to and from the cash reserve fund are amended to include a transfer of $35 million from the Jobs and Economic Development Fund in fiscal year 23-24, a transfer of $13.841 million from the Governor's Emergency Cash Fund in fiscal year 23-24, a transfer of $5 million in fiscal year 24-25 to the State Insurance Fund, and a modification of the transfer to the Nebraska Capital Construction Fund to reduce the transfer in fiscal year 23-24 by $15,950,245. Then we get to under the explanation of the amendment. In section 1 and 2, $7 million in fiscal year 23-24 and $5 million in fiscal year 24-25 is transferred from the Nebraska Education Improvement Fund to the Education Future Fund. In section 3, $500,000 in fiscal year 23-24 is transferred from the Professional Practices Commission to the Education Future Fund. In section 4, $3 million in fiscal year 23-24 is transferred from the Records Management Cash Fund to the General Fund. In section 5 and 6, $2.5 million in fiscal year 23-24 and $2 2.5 million in fiscal year 24-25 is transferred from the Employment Security Special Contingent Fund to the general fund. In section 7, 20 million is transferred from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to the Rural Workforce Housing Investment Fund in fiscal year 23-24. In section 8, 5 million is transferred from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to the Middle Income Workforce Housing Fund in 24-25. In section 9, 4 million in fiscal year 24-25 is transferred from the Civic and Community Center Financing Fund to the general fund. In section 10, the remaining unexpended balance on June 30, 2025 is transferred from the Job Training Cash Fund to the general fund. In section 11, 9 million in fiscal year 24-25 is transferred from the Site and Development Fund to the general fund. In sections 12 and 13, 1.16 million or a little more than that is transferred to in fiscal year 23-24. Then $526,716 is transferred in fiscal year 24-25. It's transferred from the Department of Motor Vehicle Cash Fund to the general fund. In section 14, 6.5 million in 23-24 is transferred from the Water Recreation Enhancement Fund to the general fund. In sections 15 and 16, 4 million in 23-24 and 1 million in 24-25 is transferred from the Revenue Enforcement Fund. I'll get back on the mic and finish because there's some more. I just think the public should know about all these transfers that we're discussing. It's very interesting. It's a lot of transfers, the most I've ever seen since my time in the legislature, to be honest. So I think it's important for the public to know and for us to have conversations about these funds. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Wayne, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. Will Senator Jacobson yield to a question?
Senator Jacobson, will you yield?
Certainly.
Thank you. Can you take a little bit of time and talk to me about North Platte and the benefits of North Platte and where you see North Platte growing to?
Well, I think North Platte's in a unique position right now because of the new sustainable beef packing plant, which is set to employ about 875 new employees just for the plant by itself. Okay. So that will be huge growth along with all the ancillary business.
Tell me a little bit more about sustainable beef and how Union Pacific or in the railroad ties into that area and how you see the growth of Hershey's and how the inland port has facilitated that.
Well, obviously the inland port is a big deal because with the UP slowing down some of its traffic coming through North Platte because of the reductions in coal, they've had to pick up other business. And so we used to not be able to have any kind of rail sidings there because of the traffic going through North Platte. But now that the coal traffic slowed down, UP is actually looking for more business. So that made it possible for the inland, first of all, the rail park to be built in North Platte, or actually it's outside of Hershey. So it's really the Hershey rail facility, which is just west of North Platte. And so that gets us onto the main lines. And then, of course, the rail park, which was a bill that was brought by my predecessor to really provide funding to be able to create an inland port and expand the rail park. So we were the first designated inland port, which would allow us then to expand the rail park and be able to be an import-export facility out of the central part of the state of Nebraska. So with the interstate, our airport with a mile-long runway in North Platte, along with the Highway 83 running between Canada and Mexico, we're uniquely positioned to be able to really accommodate that facility and significant growth.
So where do you see in the next, 5 to 10 years, if you could give a 1-minute elevator pitch on where you see North Platte growing and its strengths and how it gets there. Can you give me that for 1 minute or less?
Well, gosh, now you're being challenging when you say 1 minute or less, but let me try. I think if you look at the growth of Omaha, look at the growth of Lincoln, moved to Grand Island. Grand Island now is an MSA. Grand Island has grown significantly over the last 10 years. Kearney is growing significantly, still behind Grand Island. Grand Island's behind Lincoln. North Platte is behind Kearney, but North Platte's now seeing its growth. So we're continuing to see growth along the interstate as we move west. That will continue to happen if we're willing to make the right investments in those markets to able to accommodate affordable housing, be able to accommodate the growth that has to occur, be able to accommodate the infrastructure that has to go in place.
So that's my last question. So when you think about growth and investments, where do you explain how the state's investment in sustainable beef and the inland port and why that initial seed money, we'll call it, facilitated all the growth you're talking about? Like, it kind of, people don't understand how the inland port works and how everything works, and that's kind of why I want to have this dialogue.
Sure. Well, I think it's important to note that there's a significant upfront infrastructure cost that companies are not going to come in individually and invest in that. They will invest on the back end, but they won't invest on the front end. So you've really got to get the base infrastructure in place, and then you're going to attract these companies individually that are going to come in, and then it's going to balloon from there as they come in. It's a little bit like a housing development. You're not going to go into a piece of farmland, a quarter section of farmland, and build a house. Somebody's got to come in and put in the infrastructure, street, sewer, water, et cetera. That's very expensive to do. Someone's got to do that on the front end and be willing to take the patient money to get those lots sold over time as that housing develops out. This is the same concept.
Thank you. And colleagues, one, that's the easiest way to filibuster is to ask a colleague a question so you don't have to do all the work. But two, the other part of it is starting having these dialogues, you start to figure out and really have a conversation how economic development really occurs and how it works in Western Nebraska. And the reason I did that is purposely. When I start talking about North Omaha these next couple of weeks, North Omaha is no different than North Platte.
It's time.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senators Wayne and Jacobson. Senator Dungan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And colleagues, I do rise today, again, similar to Senator Conrad, a little bit indifferent as to the IPP motion, and still listening to the conversation regarding LB 1413. I think this is a continuation of the conversation that we had earlier today about some of the sort of 30,000-foot view concerns that people have about what's going on with this budget. As I expressed before, and as I guess I continue to see with the LB 1413 transfers, I continue to have concerns about the diminution of a lot of these cash funds. And the fact that we are seeing these cash funds reduced relatively quickly, I think is worthy of pause. And I certainly think it's worthy of a conversation. So while I know that seeing IPP on the board can be alarming to a number of my colleagues, I want to, at least from my perspective, and I can't speak for my colleagues, reassure you that this is not a return, as Senator Conrad said, to last year or perpetual filibusters. This is part of a conversation that should happen and I think needs to happen. Already in listening to Senator Wayne talk, listening to Senator Conrad talk, I've had a couple of things raised that I have questions about. And so I hope my colleagues are listening to the concerns we have, I guess, with regard to some of these cash funds and some of these transfers. From that 30,000-foot view, and I guess just philosophically speaking, I do have concerns when we start to see cash funds for one particular purpose swept and then have that money put onto the general fund for a totally separate purpose. Now, I understand if we have a massive amount of money sitting in a fund that's not being used, it can be attractive to potentially utilize that for other purposes when we're looking at moving money around. But I want to encourage my colleagues to remember that the reason we have money in these cash funds is often for a very specific purpose. And if we start to get rid of that money and use it for other things, we may be in a perfectly fine situation right now, but it is entirely possible that we could find ourselves down the road wishing we had left that money in those accounts in an effort to utilize them. Now, That being said, I certainly think there are some set-aside funds that we can look at using. For example, I've expressed my concerns at the amount of money that's been set aside for the canal. I think that last year we had a very robust conversation about whether or not the money set aside for the canal needs to be as much as it is. I completely understand the benefits of the canal, and speaking with my friends in Western Nebraska, understand the necessity of a lot of what we're talking about there. But I think Senator John Kavanaugh, my roommate, had specifically discussed how that canal did not need to be as large, perhaps, as was being discussed. And so I do think we can always have a conversation around whether money can be moved for one purpose to another. But there was a conversation earlier about that state unemployment insurance trust fund, that SUIT fund. And I think we're going to continue to hear about this, but in looking at Senator Conrad's amendment and also speaking to members of the chamber and speaking to concerned friends of mine in the business community, I think there's a couple of parts of the law in that provision that need to be discussed. The specific Nebraska revised statute that creates that fund specifically calls it a special fund. And why I think that's noteworthy is it's a little bit different in a cash fund to denote it as a quote unquote special fund, because it does seem to delineate a difference between those two kinds of funds. In addition to that, the money that's being held in that state unemployment insurance trust fund is specifically said that it shall be held in trust for a very specific purpose. So when we start talking about that $70 million move from that specific state unemployment insurance trust fund over to the general funds or to the other funds it's going to be used for, I think we have to give some credence to the very specific language that was laid out in the Nebraska revised statutes with regards to the importance set aside of that unemployment insurance trust fund. Thank you, Mr. President. I was not here when that fund was created, obviously, but I've spoken to people who were, and they've essentially said to me that was set aside for that very particular purpose, and the language contained in that statute was to highlight the importance of that purpose. Now, I fully recognize that we have not tapped into part of that fund for quite some time, and that's worthy of a conversation, but the conversation that I think we should be having with regards to that is whether or not our businesses need to be taxed that additional money in order to put that into that fund moving forward. So rather than taking the money that they've already spent and not addressing the underlying problem, I think we could center a conversation moving forward with regards to what we could do to help those businesses maybe have a little bit less of a financial burden if that money's going into a fund that's not being used. But I don't think the answer is to then take that money and use it for an entirely separate purpose. So we'll keep talking about this. I'm assuming, colleagues, and I appreciate you paying attention, but I do hope we listen to the subject matter of the conversation today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Duncan. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was starting to count, very important, very, very important, how many letters are in my name versus the current presiding president's name. And I will get back to you because, I could count on the microphone. He has 18. So I guess count my name, first and last. Although, in fairness, I do believe that Bradford is not the presiding officer's first name. I think it's his middle name. Yes. So when he's able to, I'm going to find out what his first name is, and then we'll count that. Or we could count both of our first and middle and last names and see who has the longest name. My full name, because my parents wanted to make it very hard for me to learn how to spell my name when I was little, is Michaela, not spelled a normal way, M-A-C-H-A-E-L-A, Michaela Munnelly Cavanaugh, M-A-C-H-A-E-L-A-M-U-N-N-E-L-L-Y-C-A-V-A-N-A-U-G-H. Try learning to write that in grade school. Yeah, exactly. And then there was an 8th grade where we had to write our full names in hieroglyphics, and I was the only one that had to take mine home to finish. Everybody else finished in class. So very traumatizing. Just kidding. I wanted to get back to the tourism conversation because I did get a letter from Eunice Hospitality from, I'm probably not saying that, Young's? Eunice, thank you. I am saying it right. Okay, Eunice Hospitality in Kearney, and about tourism. But before I dig into that, I just want to mention one of the things about tourism that I guess gives me pause on this, and it is mostly for selfish reasons, but also to give a shout out to some of us, our former colleague, Senator Sarah Howard, is how will this impact Passport, Nebraska? And for those of you that know former Senator Sarah Howard and or follow her on Twitter, you can find pretty much two things on Twitter, her Twitter, cats and Passport, Nebraska. Oh, 3 books. Cats, books, Passport, Nebraska. It's a very controversial Twitter account. I highly recommend it, especially during Passport, Nebraska season, because she and her husband try to go to all of the stops and they document them, and it is very fun to watch. I try to get to as many stops as I can, but I have never made it through the whole Passport. So I want to make sure that whatever we do with tourism dollars, we are protecting that Passport, Nebraska. And whoever came up with Passport, Nebraska, that was genius, because it's a great way to find unique things across the state. One year I was visiting my aunt out in Hooker County, which is in Senator Brewer's district, the Sandhills, and in the town of Mullen, there is an art gallery. Hooker County is about 500 people, and the town is about 500 people. But they have an art gallery, and it was on Passport, Nebraska, and it happened to be, I was visiting her during the Passport time, and so we went, and it's a really lovely art gallery, and actually my parents have a painting hanging in their house from there, and it's one of my favorite paintings, and I should remember what the artist's name is. But anyways, if you're in Mullen, if you're going through Hooker County, you can see the art gallery. There is also a bar restaurant. I can't remember what's called. The other Senator Kavanaugh would know, because his bachelor party was tanking down the Dismal River in Hooker County back in 2008. I got married in 2007 and he got married in 2008. And I don't remember when he had his bachelor party. I just remember that they all got sunburnt in a horse tank down the Dismal River, which is also very fun and highly recommend tanking down the Dismal River. But anyways, so I think I'm almost out of time. I didn't get very far in this Young's letter, but thank God we got to the bottom of Senator Von Gilren's name. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Jacobson, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, first I want to correct Senator Michaela Kavanaugh on one item, and that is Hooker County is my district. It used to be Brewer's district, but he abandoned it, and I picked it up through redistricting. So it's my district. Thank you very much. Great. And I saw you at the county fair, so I just want to point that part out. Yes. Well, let me talk to you. I want to talk to you a little bit about an amendment that I filed that will be coming up either now or it'll likely come up on Select in terms of the $5 million transfer to DED from the travel fund. My concern there is I want to make sure we all understand where those dollars come from and what the plan is for the Tourism Commission. The Tourism Commission is appointed, the members are appointed and confirmed by the legislature, the directors appointed. But I can tell you that they collect 1% of hotel gross receipts, hotels, B&Bs, and 1% of the gross receipts is an occupation tax that gets collected, goes into the fund. There was $7.8 million collected in FY 22-23. The projected receipts for 24-25 is $9.1 million. And then the commission also brought in approximately $500,000 from advertising in the state's travel guide. This means the State Visitors Improvement Fund should be approximately $9.5 million available for the next fiscal year. The Tourism Commission, however, is limited on how much of those dollars they can spend. They have to get permission from the Appropriations Committee. And so the commission's current spending authority for 24-25 is $7.5 million. They went to the committee asking for that authority to be moved to $10.5 million for fiscal year 25. However, in no event would they be allowed to spend more than what's in the fund. Now, as you recall, moving back through time, we went through a pandemic. And when we went through the pandemic, the hotels were empty. So there wasn't a lot of occupation tax that was collected then. And there wasn't a lot of advertising going on because nobody was going to come anyhow. I also know that there's people that weren't so excited about Nebraska. Frankly, it ain't for everyone. Okay, I get that. But that's over now. Okay, and we're moving on. Now, we've had conversation in the inheritance tax debate, and we added an amendment to that there would be, and that the tourism dollars, the county tourism dollars would not be rated, but that we would add someone from DED and someone from the state chamber to the tourism board. So we've got additional input on that board as to how those dollars are allocated. My concern is that these are dollars that by statute go to the Tourism Commission and should be spent by them through the people that are involved in that commission and what's happening throughout the state, namely the people that are paying that money to begin with, which are the people that are staying in motels and hotels. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh mentioned Paul Eunice. I've mentioned before, he's got over 700 hotel rooms, very nice rooms in Kearney, Nebraska, huge contributor to this fund. I can tell you he's not wanting that money to go to DED, nor would any other of the hoteliers across the state want that money going to DED. Why are we going to move that money to DED and trust that they're going to do more with it than what tourism could do, particularly if DED and the state chamber are going to have representatives on that board? So my amendment is to strike that transfer, leave that money with state tourism. It's not state dollars. It's dollars that are coming from occupation taxes that are being collected by hoteliers. And they're going to use these dollars to go to other states, be able to advertise Nebraska. So things like Nebraska Land Days, the other activities that occur in Nebraska. So it might be billboards and things like that in the Chicago area, Oklahoma City area, others, to get people to come to Nebraska, experience Nebraska Land Days, which, by the way, attracts people from all over the world annually in June. So come out there in June and experience rodeo and a unique opportunity to see a lot of things in North Platte. So with that said, I appreciate the time, Mr. President. I'll yield the remainder of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Senator John Cavanaugh, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, like others before me, I guess I'm ambivalent about the IPP. I'm not supportive of 1413 as written. I know I've heard there's going to be some amendments that are offered. And so I look to see how those are going to be adopted or not in the conversation. I appreciate Senator Jacobson's comments about the tourism fund and how it's acquired and paid, and that it should go for the purpose to which it's intended, which is one of my arguments about a lot of the funds we're talking about. And I appreciate a lot of the work of the Tourism Nebraska, in particular the Tourism Passport. I think is a pretty fun program that they have, and I usually try to do a few of those every summer with my kids and find new locations that I had not previously been aware of to make a trip to. Along the way, I'm trying to remember, I stopped at a restaurant in Grand Island a few years back, and actually one of my favorite things that I found in the Tourism Passport was in Aurora, which was I believe it was called the Edgerton Explorer, which is a kind of hands-on science museum in Aurora, Nebraska, that I found out about through the Tourism Passport, took my kids there. We had a wonderful afternoon, and it's one of my favorite museums that are kid-friendly in the state, and I learned about it through the Tourism Passport. So I appreciate the work of Nebraska Tourism, and that's the type of thing they use the funding for, to get folks like me to come to places like Aurora for that program. And I think in response to the other Senator Cavanaugh, she said something about going tanking on the Dismal River, and for the record, it was the Middle Loop River. The Dismal, I didn't think is not wide enough, at least at that portion of Hooker County, to take a tank on. It's the Middle Loop that runs north of there, and it's run by Glidden's Canoe Rental. That was fun. So had some good times in Hooker County. Have not been there personally since Senator Jacobson became the representative, but I'd be happy to go back. So to return to the cash transfers, which I believe is what this bill is now, I have spoken about several of them before, and like I said, I think we're going to have some amendments about that. And I've heard tell that maybe there's an amendment aside from Senator Jacobson's amendment about the tourism fund. There's one about the unemployment benefits, and as I previously stated, that this is a fund that employers pay in for a specific purpose, and we should of course save the funds for the purpose to which they are intended. And if we don't need that amount of funds, then we should find a way to decrease the amount that's being brought in. But that's a good example of a fund. It's kind of a rainy day fund, which is the purpose to which it exists, or is to have money in the case of an emergency. And I like the example, and I know Senator Jacobson would agree, about the underground storage tank fund, which I talked about recently, but not on this bill or the last bill. That when I first got here, I brought a bill that would take some of the money out of the underground storage tank fund because I was looking for $200,000 or something like that for a bill that I brought. And somebody said, oh, well, they've got money sitting in that fund and they're not using it. And so I brought that bill, and the industry folks came and testified against it, and we're kind of fired up.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thought that was weird, and then come to learn through time why they were so protective of that fund, because the money is paid in by industry, being gas stations and folks in the industry of underground storage tanks, and that fund sits there for remediation in catastrophic incidences. And if the money's not there, then someone else is going to have to pay out of it. And one of them is bankers who maybe hold the note on a gas station or facility. And then it makes it, one, either doesn't get cleaned up or doesn't clean up as quickly, and somebody else has an unexpected expense. And so the fund is there to help with those situations, but it needs to have money in the fund. So that was one of the proposed original funds to be taken from, which ultimately wasn't. But my point is, all of these funds, when they have money in them, maybe the money is there for future reasons. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Riepe, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to echo the comments and the concerns expressed by Senator Conrad. Senator Conrad expressed the confiscation of $70 million from the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund of the $77 million balance. These $70 million do not belong to the state of Nebraska. They belong to the employers who have paid a tax, fundamentally not unlike an insurance premium. One could argue employers have overpaid given the fact the trust fund has grown from 50 million in 10 years ago to today's $77 million balance. Where should the substantial trust fund balance go? It should go to workforce development and work training, and not confiscated for unrelated and temporary property tax relief. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Riepe. Senator Conrad, you're recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Thank you so much as well to my friend Senator Riepe for his thoughtful, supportive comments in regards to the amendment that I filed to address the misguided sweep of the Unemployment Trust Fund, and that will come up later in regards to LB 1413. I think that there is an ever-growing bipartisan effort to come together and say that this is not a wise sweep for a variety of reasons. And I do think that those are deeply rooted in legal policy and economic concerns. And I want to talk just a little bit about those in greater detail. Again, if you look at the legislative history, authorizing this program from 1994, you had a similarly diverse set of senators coming together, working with the business community to figure out how to assess these resources and what to do with these resources. And they're meant to be a insurance policy, for example, a rainy day fund when there are a lot of claims made in regards to unemployment during a period of economic downturn or recession. So by simply noting that the fund balance itself is high, so we should sweep it, that fundamentally misunderstands the program. The program by design is meant to have a high balance. It is forward-looking in order to capture resources during good times, because there will be a fast and a hard draw on them during down times. And there aren't other places to go in terms of pivots or backfills or loans or otherwise. And that's exactly how this program was designed and for these purposes. Additionally, this is meant to be that safety net for our unemployment program, which is critically important to workforce development. And excess funds are supposed to be utilized, again, with careful crafting and consultation between policymakers and the business community for some of these excesses, and I'm generalizing here, colleagues, to be used for job training purposes. And again, this is a question that we need to ask a lot more before we delve deeper into this. But our friends on appropriations are saying, well, this has a really high balance, so we should go ahead and sweep it. Number one, it's supposed to have a high balance by design. Number two, those funds held in trust for these specific purposes have been requested by businesses across the state saying, hey, we'd like to develop a job training program on X, Y, and Z to get people back to work or to recruit or retain employees. Crickets, nothing. They're not getting the funds pushed out from the Department of Labor, even upon request for appropriate purposes, which again is artificially inflating some of these fund balances. And that's something that we need to take into account to make sure that these funds are being utilized for their best and highest purposes, and instead of just languishing in a cash fund needlessly. Thank you, Mr. President. Two other points that I want to make in regards to this issue is I mentioned this yesterday during our budget debate, but it bears repeating today. This is a manufactured budgetary crisis. We are in a time of economic prosperity, and we are borrowing, stealing, and sweeping all these cash funds akin to what we do during a significant downturn or a recession in order to, I guess, prop up or pay for some undetermined property tax plan that's emanating from the governor's office and the revenue committee at some point in the future over the next 18 days or so, what have you. But colleagues, we shouldn't be raiding these funds at a time of economic prosperity, which is what we are in and at today. Thank you, Mr. President. And I'd be happy to take questions from other members if they want to yield time.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Frederickson, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think our colleague, Senator Conrad, is a master of sort of sneaking in that last statement when she's at the end of time. Good afternoon, colleagues and Nebraskans. I know we're getting close to the 5 o'clock hour here. I just wanted to kind of highlight, I think there's a number of things in LB 1413 that warrant, I think, robust discussion by the body. And I think Senator Conrad and Senator Riepe and also Senator Slama, I know, has been working hard on this unemployment fund cash sweep here. And I think this is one of the nice things about, again, as Senator Conrad mentioned earlier, bipartisanship is still very much alive in the legislature. The unemployment cash sweep, I also have some concerns about it, and particularly from just from a business perspective. So for folks at home who are kind of maybe loosely following this debate, so businesses pay into this fund. So this is a tax that is placed on businesses in our state, employers in our state, and they pay into this fund specifically for unemployment. So, our state's fund it's a bit inflated, is what we're learning, and there is certainly, I think, question about what do we do with those funds. I do think I think it would be prudent for this legislature to say, if we are going to be transferring these funds, given the context that this is coming from the business community, we should be really considerate that we spend these funds in a way that is maybe in line with the business's goals, whether that's a reimbursement to businesses, or if that's, looking at things like workforce development, for example, looking at things like childcare, thinking about what are the priorities of the business community, given the fact that these are funds that the business community has, in fact, been paying into. So I'm going to continue to listen to that. Again, I appreciate the work of both Senator Slama and Senator Conrad on this, and I will yield any remaining time to Senator Conrad, should she so wish.
Thank you, Senator Frederickson. Senator Conrad, you yielded 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to my friend, Senator Frederickson. I wanted to continue just one key point in regards to the dynamic that we see on this issue regarding the unemployment trust fund. And I want to just be clear about this, because sometimes it can be confusing for new members, and perhaps even seasoned members might need a refresher on this. So if you go back and you look at the transcript from the committee hearing on this topic, you will see a host of information provided by Director Albin as to why he thinks it is okay for the governor and the legislature to sweep this fund. And no doubt, Director Albin's been around a long time and is well respected and takes his job very seriously. And I've been grateful to always have a strong professional relationship with him, and I'm grateful for the work that he and his team does at our Department of Labor. But let me remind you of one thing here. So the Department of Labor is a code agency. And so that is a different dynamic when they are testifying on behalf of the administration, where they are typically aligned with the administration or the governor's policy agenda and political prerogatives. And so senior members will know that sometimes it can be challenging to get an objective take from code agency directors or agents when you're trying to kind of get to the bottom of things. Now, they're entitled to their opinion. That's just the way the structure works. But thank you, Mr. President. The point being here, and it's not to disparage Director Albin, who does a great job, it's to remind legislative colleagues that when the governor and the code agency director say, go ahead and sweep this, it's fine. But then you talk to the people who are impacted on the front lines, the small businesses and the larger businesses who have fought against this proposal. That should be a red flag, colleagues, that the political alignment there isn't giving you the information you need to make the decision. And that's why it's critical that we have stakeholders outside of state government who can provide that independent perspective. So our small business organizations and our large business organizations all across the state are saying, do not make this sweep. It is wrong from a policy perspective. It is divorced from economic reality, and there may be legal concerns. So we need to take that to heart, because it is part of the dynamic that is before us in assessing this budgetary item. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator McKinney, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise again in support of the IPP motion and against LB 1413. So back to all these transfers that are happening. So in section 19, 7 million in fiscal year 23-24 is transferred from the professional and occupational credentialing cash fund to the general fund. In sections 20 and 21, 11 million in fiscal year 23-24 and 4 million in 24-25 transferred from the behavioral health service fund to the general fund. Very interesting. Then we have in sections 22 and 23, 14.75 million in 23-24, and then 1.75 in 24 transferred from the Health and Human Services cash fund to the general fund. In sections 24, 1 million in fiscal year 23-24 transferred from the Contractor and Professional Employer Organization Registration Cash Fund to the general fund. In section 25, 1 million in fiscal year 23-24 transferred from the Nebraska Training and Support Cash Fund to the general fund. In section 26, 70 million in fiscal year 23-24 is transferred from the State Unemployment Trust Fund to the general fund. I just got an email about this, and the unions are not happy about this. Just to let y'all know, appropriations and whoever supports that, the unions don't support 70 million in fiscal year 23-24 being transferred from the State Unemployment Trust Fund to the general fund, and you could think of many reasons why. In section 27, 5 million in fiscal year 24-25 is transferred from the State Visitors Promotion Cash Fund to the general fund. In section 28, 50 million in 23-24 is transferred from the Jobs and Economic Development Fund to the Roads and Operations Cash Fund. That is a real interesting one. So we're spending 50 million on roads. Where are the roads going? Because, if we're spending money on roads, I got a lot of potholes in my district every year. So, we could use money for roads in North Omaha. And there's other legislative districts with unpaved roads. Are we talking about an interstate system? I don't know. Interesting. But 50 million on roads. The real issue with all this is we're basically rating all these cash funds now. So my question is, in 27 or 28, when the state is going to be in some fiscal constraints, what are we going to do if there's no money? I'm just curious. I would love for somebody to answer that question. What are we going to do in 27 or 28 or 28, 29 when these cash funds are low, the revenues are not the greatest? Where are we going to get the money from? How are we going to figure this out? And on top of that, you'll be opening a new prison that you devoted $350 million for, not operations. So, and you still don't want to close NSP. So there will be a lot of interesting conversations in about 3 to 4 years in this place about why we raided these cash funds and we don't have any money to support anything. And hopefully, revenue projections change, and maybe one day we'll be open to revenue streams like legalizing marijuana, like our neighbors, those type of things to increase revenues, because we're going to have a problem. And you can vote for this and not think we won't, but we will have a problem eventually raiding all these cash funds. So I just wanted to give the public some knowledge about these. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Wayne, you recognize.
Motion to overrule, Chair. No, I'm just joking. See, we didn't even have a motion. Everybody, I got to calm down. It's late in the day. So where are the roads going? They are not going anywhere. They're roads, but I understand this point because I have tons of potholes. In fact, I have the most unpaved roads in the city limits in my district. I said in the city limits, Brandt. Senator Brandt got up because he thinks he has more unpaved roads. He has longer unpaved roads. I have short unpaved roads with potholes that are as big as swimming pools. So in the summertime, that's where we go. That's why the city started shutting down all the swimming pools, because we can just swim in the streets. We got potholes, and you ought to come out. Senator Urban does a big belly flop. Then we have to go to the next pothole because now it doesn't have any water in it anymore. So it's a whole thing here. But no, there are concerns about the budget. The reason I'm not getting on too much about the budget is because we're going to have more conversations, and I look forward to those conversations. But I agree with Senator McKinney that in 2027, 2028, I will be hopefully somewhere in a place that has no signal, where I'm watching on some like Wi-Fi, the legislature grapple with what they're going to do with this deficit. And then Senator Urban's going to send me an email and say, I told you epic tax was the way to go. And I would say, I think I co-sponsored it every year. So I'm happy that you were right. But I think they'll listen now and probably not be his response back. But that's how it goes. So anyway, this budget is very, very interesting. Is the best way to put it. And I don't fault the Appropriations Committee, because they do what's in front of them and look at what's in front of them. I do think we have to figure out, and I've been saying this, a better budgeting plan of how we budget and how we do our budgets here. Will Senator Decay yield to a question?
Senator Decay, will you yield to a question?
Yes. Senator Decay, you have some very beautiful area up in your district. Can you tell me some of the strengths and beauties of your district up there?
Certainly. Number one, we would aspire for gravel roads up where I live, for one thing. But we do live in the rolling hills of northeast Nebraska. It's beautiful. And I would invite anybody to come up to that neck of the woods and take 3 or 4 days to see what the natural beauty of the state is up there.
Thank you. So I heard that there's a rumor out there that you may be hanging up your shoes and your stripes. You might give it another year. Can you enlighten us on that? I don't want to read about it on Twitter like I am right now about Trev Alberts. I want to hear directly from you.
If I had to make a decision right now, I would say I'm done. But a lot of things can happen between now and next October. We'll just see how I feel, see what it looks like out there, and how much I want to participate and how much I have on my plate at that time.
I hear you on that. Will Senator Doran yield to a question?
Senator Dorn, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
Hey, how'd that sales tax increase we gave you guys work out for you in Gage County?
That worked out real well for us. I forget, I don't know how long a time period it was, but it created about a little over 5 million that now was not used to pay the judgment by property taxes. In other words, sales tax did.
Doesn't it feel good that you can pass a bill and watch it go into fruition and it actually makes changes in your community?
Yes, very, very thankful for that. Very, very thankful for the legislature and everybody's help up here, because without everybody's help up here, that bill would have never been passed.
Now, was that an override? If I recall right, was that an override?
Yes, that was. Yes.
Yeah. See, good things happen sometimes when you do an override.
Yeah. Sometimes it works. Yes.
Sometimes I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Will Senator Reapy yield to a question?
Senator Reapy will yield to a question.
Yes, I will.
This is my last session, and I just kind of wonder if you would give me some words of wisdom with the last 30 seconds of how I should finish out this year.
Well, my words of wisdom would be is take your 4 years and come back for 8 more.
That's not smart.
Ditch the Argyle sweater.
And still wear the same sweater.
I said words of wisdom, not punishment, but I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne, Senator Reapy, and Senator Dorn. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized. This is your 3rd time on the mic before you close. Overruled.
That's asking for a motion to overrule the chair right there. Woo! Okay, it's almost 5 o'clock. clearly. I would like to do something unexpected. I'd like to ask Senator Mosier to yield to a question.
Senator Moser, would you yield to a question?
Yes, I would.
Senator Mosier, I would love to hear from you about potholes.
Yes, they're a wonderful thing.
Can you tell me more?
Well, my bit of information that I wanted to talk about is the Build Nebraska Act takes a small percentage of the sales tax and rebates that back to cities and counties for roads construction and whatever purposes. I don't believe that they're earmarked. And on average, every senator's district gets 300,000. And I think that's divided between cities and counties. So like in Senator McKinney's district, that would be in the city of Omaha and Douglas County, I assume. So both of their contributions would be available to them to spend on roads. And so if your potholes aren't getting filled, I would check with the county and the city and see what they're doing with this Build Nebraska Fund revenue that they're getting. Well, in McKinney's district, it'd be 300,000, and in Senator Wayne's district, it would be 300,000. So that's not a lot of money to fix potholes, don't get me wrong, but it is a start.
Thank you. That is a start, and it should be used. And if it's not being used, it definitely should be used for fixing potholes. Senator McKinney and I were talking about the pothole problem in our various districts. I think his district is worse than mine. I know his district is worse than mine, but my district does also have some pretty severe pothole problems. It's good to know that each district gets that money. So I wish I would have known that when I was out knocking doors in 2018, and everyone wanted to talk to me about potholes around Countryside Village and Christ the King. People who are familiar with the Omaha area, the Christ the King School and Church, and then Countryside Village is on Pacific Street, and the neighborhood streets on either side are like notoriously like you will damage your car potholes. And so when I knocked that district, that was pretty much the number one thing everybody wanted to talk to me about. And I was like, cool, I don't know how to fix potholes in your streets in the legislature. But now, thanks to Senator Mosier's inside knowledge, I know a little bit more about it. So how much time do I have left?
Minute 51.
We can adjourn. I heard we were adjourning at a very specific time, and it was not 5:02. So if I stop talking, I'm afraid that. Oh, okay. All right. Well, then I guess I do want to talk more about the cash funds, but I suppose it can wait until tomorrow. There's so much to say and so little time. Well, not little time, there's several hours, but there's still so much to say. So thank you. And I really do want to thank everyone for the conversation on this budget. I know it might seem like a very nerdy thing, but I have really appreciated it. I think it's really important, and a lot of people put a lot of work into this, and so we should be having a robust conversation about it. So thank you, and I will yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. To the clerk for items.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Enrollment and Review reports Legislative Bill 1108 to select file with our amendments. Amendment to be printed from Senator Duncan to LB 399, Senator Jacobson to 1413. Finally, priority motion, Senator Jacobson would move to adjourn until Thursday, March 14th, 2024 at 9:00 a.m.
Question is, shall the legislature adjourn? All those in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. We are adjourned.